welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Maria Forlini, that is the Dean of the School of Architecture and Design here at NYIT, we welcome you to the Design Future Interiors, the second edition of Future Interiors Symposium series here at the Interior Design program at NYIT. So we want to thank the Lectures and Events Committee for making this happen, also to Steve Forlini for all the support. I am Florencia Vetcher, some of you know. I am currently the chair of the Interior Design Department, and it's really, truly a pleasure to see such an inspiring gathering of students, faculty, colleagues, guests come together today in this auditorium. Thank you for being here. This symposium is more than just a yearly event because we did one last spring. That was version 1. This is version 2. But more than a yearly event, it's a space for dialogue, a platform where design educators meet practice, where questions about sustainability, technology, inclusivity, and creativity come alive through conversation. This symposium, today we are looking closely at the future of interior design, not just in terms of trends, but through research, experimentation, critical thinking. And so you know that the theme is designing future interiors, invite us to reflect on how we shape the spaces we live, we work, and we dream in. And just as importantly, it asks, who are we as designing for and why? We are excited to host an incredible lineup of voices this afternoon from visionary designers like Gia Wolf, right here, Esther Vick, also here, to thought leaders like Michelle Gorman and Andrew Dent, and our student invited guest, Varun Kohli, who will help us explore new dimensions of design responsibility and innovation. So the symposium has 3 topics. We have separated, actually, Francesca has coming up with the creating part, which is the beginning, and then the exploring part. And I think the students want, I name it as sustaining part. So we are going through the 3 things this afternoon: creating, exploring, and sustaining. We are also thrilled to launch a very first issue of Interiorscapes. And you can see the magazines over there, and also Francesca will talk about it. It's a student work led by Professor Forlini. Congratulations to all the students and faculty involved, and especially Francesca Forlini for making this publication a reality. It is a beautiful example of how scholarship, design thinking, and storytelling come together in our program. Thank you for being here and for being part of this exciting day. Let's begin. This is you. This is me or you? No.
So thank you so much. Oops. Thank you so much to our chair, Florencia Vetcher, for this wonderful introduction to today's event. She's not the only one that I'd like to thank, actually. She's been extremely helpful in the organization of this event. Without her, this would have not been possible. So I heartfeltly thank Florencia for her incredible support. I also join her in thanking the Dean because she was the one that helped us make Interiorscape possible, of course, alongside the exceptional students that we will celebrate today with the launch of this exceptional students-led, let's say, publication. I will just go briefly through the organization of the event and how the event is going to unfold today. So we are starting with the launch of this exceptional volume, and I'll share some anticipations on the forthcoming volume 1 publication of Interiorscapes. Then as Professor Vetcher and Chair of Interior Design Vetcher has mentioned, we'll start with the first section that will deal with creating. Gia Wolf will speak about spatial storytelling, and Esther Beek will talk about the nature of things. And these presentations will be followed by a moderated discussion by Florencia Vetcher. We'll have a short break, and then we will resume with the second part of the symposium that will deal with exploring. So Michelle Gorman will talk about radical inclusion in design, and Andrew Dent will talk about material futures. Our students invited guest speaker, Varun Kohli, will follow up with an important lecture on responsive design through environmental sensitivities. And we'll open the floor for students' questions to the students invited lecturer, and then we will invite all the guests to the podium to have a Q&A, general Q&A. Forgot to mention that I will moderate a conversation with Michelle Gorman right after her presentation, and our interior design professor, Lyla, will moderate a conversation with Andrew Dent. So every presentation is followed by a moderated conversation, and then we will have a Q&A with the students invited guest speaker and with the entirety of our speakers today. So stay with us until the end and make sure to have questions for our speakers. I'm pretty excited to see a full room with students. So thank you so much all for attending. Now, Interiorscapes. You can see that in the room, there's a series of QR codes plus the physical copies of the magazine. You can download for free the PDF using the QR code that you see over here. So don't miss this opportunity. Now, Interiorscapes is the inaugural volume of the first magazine of the BFA in Interior Design at the School of Architecture and Design here in New York Tech. The magazine publishes the research that is conducted by first and third year students in the history of interiors path, which I have the pleasure and honor to teach. Volume 0 in specific collects the final essays produced by students in the spring of 2024. This is just partial selection of work. In fact, it was volume 0. We aim with volume 1 to have the work for both first and second year students across these academic year published. So starting with volume 0, Interiorscapes will continue to illustrate interior design stories chronologically without distinguishing the contributions of students at various levels, as it is a choral project, the result of collaborations within the BFA Interior Design program. What can you find inside Interiorscapes? Well, each student chooses a design theme or interior designer developing a critical essay in both written and visual form. Its written text is, in fact, preceded by a visual manifesto, and you can see here a few examples. Is an image that clearly summarizes the content of each student's research. Visual manifestos are students' opportunity to express their critical inquiry using a variety of media. You can see here textiles, others worked with glass, and so on. Here are, once again, some successful examples from volume 0 and an anticipation of some visual manifestos that some of the interior design students are currently working on. And we're pretty excited they will possibly be part of Interiorscapes Volume 1. Now, Interiorscapes really aim to capture this history of interiors from all around the world and across all eras. It gathers in a single volume a multiplicity of perspectives that are directed towards the interior worlds of our species. The goal is to develop a collective research path that emphasizes the role of interiors beyond the architectural envelope that contains them. Interior surfaces, the objects and humans they contain, alongside the paths of transformation and characterization that have unfolded over time, are contained inside Interiorscapes, an interior space of reflection in its own. First and third year BFA students of the History Interiors 1 and 2 and Design Theory, History and Context contributed and will continue contributing to this yearly publication. Now, this is volume 1, just a quick glimpse through the work that we are currently doing with interior design students for the very first publication of this exceptional magazine. You see some visual manifestos and photographs of different eras and time frames with different types of studies. This is just a third of the potential content that could be published in this magazine. So we are expecting a much bigger volume for the forthcoming publication of Interiorscapes volume 1. I wish we could go on, but there's more. This is possibly the very last one. Now, I want to conclude here, giving voice to the exceptional students that have helped me in the editorial efforts for volume 1 and volume 0, right? There's Lydia Mud, Nini Lobzanidze, Nini, sorry, she knows, Latoya Delon. But before inviting them to the stage, I would like to ask you an applause for every contributor to the magazine so far. So please stand up when I mention your names. Lydia Mad, Selma Elfiki, Jennifer Wu, Gabriela Lioche, and Kathy Randon for volume 0. Thank you. And for volume 1, we have so far, and just a partial list, we have Nini, and that's it. Casey Lasinski, Latoya Delon, stand up. Latoya Delon, Mosaic Tibbs, Sasha Bush-Shetain, Tiffany Joya Monicio, and Anushka Glitov. I'm sorry for the pronunciation, but thank you so much for the contribution. Now, I would like to invite to the stage Lydia, Nini, and Latoya just to share a few words about their experience working on Interiorscapes. So come over.
Well, we just wanted to speak about what an amazing opportunity getting published like this was within the class. Just getting the chance to explore opportunities within passions and within the design industry specifically and its roots. And then having the writing physically published in a magazine just shows how important that is to young designers and those skills that we'll maintain to gain confidence as we reach more towards in the industry.
I'm really proud to be a part of this year's magazine. It reflects so much of our creativity, research, and vision as interior design students. Being a part of this project taught me that interior design goes far beyond aesthetics. It's about questioning, researching, and exploring, and asking why as much as how. I hope when you read it, you see just finished projects, but curiosity, depth, and passion behind every idea. This magazine is a glimpse into the minds of future designers, and it's just the beginning.
Hi. So first, I'm very honored for my visual manifesto to be on the cover of volume 1. I think that you all should look into Interiorscapes. It's a collection of our research and our understanding of the history of interior design. And there's also a lot of lost history and lost voices that we look into. So, read it.
Okay, I think I'm a little emotional now. Now, back to us. I just want to, before we start this incredible symposium, I just want to say a few thanks that I didn't say earlier. I want to thank Jeanette Riddick that is standing over there. She's part of the lecture and events committee, and she's been exceptional in helping us making this possible. But I want to thank a lot the lecture and events committee. You don't know how much it's behind the organization of this. So Athena, Andreas, Evan, Ezio, and all the others, they've been exceptional in helping the organization of this event. So now that the thanks are due, please allow me to introduce all the speakers of today's symposium, right? We're going to read about them all at once, and then we smoothly move to the presentations of our exceptional speakers. So I start with, in a chronological order, let's say, with Gia Wolf. She is known for her interdisciplinary approach to design through the frameworks of architecture, environments, and installations. Based in Brooklyn, here in New York, she leads Studio Gia Wolf, a design practice creating multi-scale projects from residential interiors to master plans, site-specific experiences to urban interventions, gallery installations to large-scale curatorial collaborations. In 2013, Wolf won the prestigious Harvard GSD Wheelwright Prize for Floating City, the community-based architecture of parade floats. This groundbreaking research into the ephemeral architecture of Carnival continues to inspire her projects through the exploration of mobility, temporality, and collective identity. At Studio Gia Wolf, she's a frequent collaborator of world-renowned curator Claire Hankins. Together, they have completed projects for the Tate Modern, Contemporary Art Center in New Orleans, and the Fina District in Miami Beach. Other prolific partnerships have included projects with Brooklyn-based Free Cell Architecture for acclaimed clients in the creative industries. Wolf has taught at Princeton School of Architecture, Cooper Union, and Pratt Institute, and lectured internationally. She's a champion of discovering architecture's fringe interests, where design intersects with art, research, performance, and most importantly, people. Our second speaker will be Esther Beckett. She's the founder and design director of Studio Fronde and an adjunct associate professor at Pratt Institute's Industrial Design Department. Born and raised in Caracas, Venezuela, she holds a bachelor's degree in interior design and a master's in industrial design from Pratt Institute. Before funding Studio Fronde in 2022, Esther spent a decade as co-lead of 4 MAT-IV, an interior design and architecture studio where she worked on a wide range of projects, including award-winning educational spaces, Marple Street School, and Mi Casita, the School and Culture Center. Her design practice is rooted in honesty, communication, function, and beauty in the experience she creates to enhance people's lives. Years of observation, experience, and creative development ultimately led Esther to establish her own practice, Studio Fronde. We continue with speakers from part 2. Michelle Gorman is the director of the MFA Interior Design Program and professor of Interiors, Objects, and Technologies at Parsons School of Design, the New School. She is focused on inclusive design education and interdisciplinary collaboration. As a designer and technologist, Michelle has created award-winning multimedia objects, exhibitions, and interior spaces for clients, including the Public Theater, Target, Parsons New School, and Greenwood Cemetery. Her work explores social environmental justice, particularly in response to climate change. She co-founded the Radically Inclusive Student, advocating for equity in design education and the profession, and co-designed Embracing Kinship, Interconnected Interiors in the Metaverse, examining AI, belonging, and virtual spaces. Michelle's global workshops and research initiatives, such as Decolonialized and Decarbonized Dinner Party Talks and Workshops, foster dialogue on decolonization and sustainability. She champions interdisciplinary, collaborative, and radically inclusive approaches to design. And we continue with Andrew Dent, PhD. He's an EVP of Material Research and Material Connection and Chief Material Scientist at Material Bank. He's known for his integrated approach to problem solving. One of the world's leading authority on materials in design, Andrew has helped clients from startups to Fortune 500 companies take their products and spaces to the next level through innovative material selection and a unique cross-disciplinary, cross-industry perspective. Co-author of the Material Innovation book series published by Thames Hudson, and frequent speaker on sustainable material strategies and events such as TEDx Grand Rapids and TED New York City, Dr. Dent is ever ready to solve design problems with unexpected material solutions. And we conclude with our student invited guest speaker, Varun Kohli, that is a fierce advocate for environmental and social sustainability. He creates and implements integrated design processes for significant projects worldwide. His meticulous approach purposefully dissolves the boundaries between built, human, and natural ecosystems. An industry leader, Varun has contributed to major architecture firms as well as his own studio in New York, integrating environmental analytics and sustainable design ranging from urban scale resiliency and decarbonization to major commercial, education, aviation, and mixed-use development projects, both domestically and internationally. As the Director of Sustainability at Corgan, Varun provides firm-wide leadership on climate and sustainability topics. With a focus on integrating environmental sensitivities in design, Varun collaborates with the Yale Center for Ecosystems plus Architecture, researchers on novel pedagogic models for environmental design, and has taught courses at Harvard GSD RPA. He recently authored a chapter on energy modeling in architecture, a practical guide published by RIBA, and currently serves on the board of Oklahoma Foundation, working to build a net zero school to provide education in a remote region in northern India. Okay, well, thank you for the guests to be here, and we continue this approach as we welcome our first speaker, Gia Wolf.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I'm kind of behind this big screen here, but
Thank you for inviting me here. This is such an honor, and the lineup of guests is really incredible.
Get closer, maybe.
Thank
somewhere.
you. Is that okay? Thank
Yes.
you, Florencia and Francesca. I run an interdisciplinary design practice where we practice creating through the frameworks of architecture, environments, and installations. The projects I will share today are examples that span these programs and identify opportunities for the future practice of interior design to be less dogmatic about enclosed spaces and rather about framing interactions, dissolving boundaries of interiority and where human engagement can complete the design. One of the outcomes of this kind of framework, in my practice at least, yields different narratives and spatial storytelling through the user experience. I want to start by sharing 3 influential reference images outside of my own work that help to ground these ideas. So this is the first image showing a still from the film Last Year in Marienbad. It has people perfectly placed as objects in the field, lined with manicured trees that are layered and iteratively repeated, such that they draw hard perspectival lines on the image. Between the people and the perspective, the image is both intimate and forever. This is an image from the artist Vito Acconci, studying movement in space, interacting with a simple human-scaled object, the stool. By repetitively moving up and down, he is both creating and expanding the definition of space around the stool. This is happening at a 1-to-1 scale between the body and the object. And this is Oscar Niemeyer's house in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. In this case, the sculptures and the furniture are the defining elements by which space around them is understood. In a sense, this project collapses the concepts of the previous 2 projects and creates something new. It furthermore expands the notions of interior by how it interacts with the surrounding landscape, literally and figuratively as part of the interior space. With these images and concepts in mind, I will dive into my own projects, starting with the research that is at the core of much of my work. This project started through the award of the Wheelwright Prize and stems from my architectural interests in the performative character of space and building and the reciprocal relationships between bodies and structures. My research delves into the traditions of parade floats as both sculpture and stage, a spectacle, as well as a gathering point for community. These images are at an urban scale, but capture moments where the street becomes an interior street theater. Here we see the trees in the foreground that were used in the performance earlier and are now making their way back to the warehouse. But for one moment, they are in line with the real street trees. For a moment, just one moment, where you were lucky to be standing in the right place at the right time, the trees created a new lush landscape, a streetscape, sorry.
If anyone has seen puppetry theater, you know that you must suspend your understanding of scale in order to fall into the narrative of the story. Here, too, we have to suspend our beliefs to temporarily acknowledge the new narrative of the streetscape. Similarly, this image, of course, frames the real building in the background and places the workers in the foreground right into the picture frame itself. And lastly, the magic of this image is in fact that the building becomes the backdrop to the streetscape float, while the actual workers in the actual street are mixed into this cacophony doing real work. The cityscape is completely collapsed into a multi-dimensional interior street theater. All right, here we go. This is an exhibition design and an installation unto itself for the Contemporary Art Center in New Orleans. Here, I was able to apply some of the ideas noted in the Wheelwright Prize research to a project. In the plan, you can see that a dark street was created around the exterior, asking the viewer to participate in the exhibition by walking in a procession around the exhibition. Here you can see the darkened path punctuated by spotlights leading you from point A to point B. And as you work your way around the exhibit, the viewer leaves the street and steps into the artist's vignettes for an intimate experience with the artist's work. And another example of the artist's work, separated by walls, both made out of gypsum and walls made out of the darkness or lack of light. This project was at the Great Turbine Hall at the Tate Modern Museum in London. Referencing Oscar Niemeyer's iconic Sambadrome, which he created in Rio de Janeiro for the 1984 Carnival, and interplaying with the naturally processional character of Herzog and de Meuron's design Turbine Hall, I created 5,500 linear feet of vibrant pink-red ropes suspended from one end of the hall to the other. The installation, titled Canopy, serves to engage and guide both the audience and the performers through the unique street-sized space. From afar, the pieces of rope were seemingly hairline thin. Each strand was physically connected to the building's roof truss on the east and west ends of the hall and visually connected the vast space with 10 catenary curves. At the lowest point in the curve, the rope split paths and invited viewers inside and in between the canopy. Looking back towards the entry, performers align themselves with the installation. And up close, but just out of reach, the ropes reveal their massiveness at a rough and twisted texture. The next set of projects looks at architectural spaces that are classically interior to a mix of kind of interior-exterior to classically exterior, but all challenge the original objective of framing interactions, dissolving boundaries, and human engagement. So this project, entitled Ensemble, is a site-specific design for the Collins Park Rotunda in Miami. Here you can see the rotunda as an object in the field. The site is a mere extension of the interior space. The concept reimagines the rotunda as a boundaryless stage, taking clues from the earlier research, and establishes intimate connections between performer and spectator. Referencing Theater in the Round, where the performer is center stage, we pushed and pulled at the edges to create a more integrated and dynamic connection between performer and spectator. The procession from the street is seamlessly pulled inside and maintains a linear flow around the interiority and eventually back outside as a means to dissolve the distinction between inside and outside. The sinuous curves of the wall entice occupants to continuously move through the space, and the patterned concrete formwork, which echoes the push-pull dynamic of the space, reinforces the same idea at the scale of the material texture. And here you can see the performer is in the central lower area of the space. And in this image, you can see the performer is now in the upper peripheral area. And here you can see the intimacy, the proximity between the participant and the performer. And naturally, in all scenarios, the project questions who is on stage. While this project is another interior example, it plays with ideas of exterior in its use of materials and the transformation of the space with the passing of the sun. Just a little caveat that this project is pretty new and has not been professionally photographed yet, so the images are not super great, but I still wanted to share them in the context of this symposium. The materiality and objects in an otherwise square space create micro moments of visual depth. The bar, which protrudes into the space, has a wood veneer of tree ring patterns with custom designed stools that are meant to evoke a blurry image of flowers. Here you can see the stools, the bar stools. The one on the left is by day, and the one at night on the right are layered in moving streaks of light, like shooting stars made by an overhead disco ball. And on one side of the room, monolithic paint hides the ornate molding details and allows the organized objects on the shelves to stand out. On the other side, the room is organic with life and plants and a busy mural painted by Miami artist Naomi Fisher. Up close, you can see the iridescent highlights, only visible as the sun moves through the room, highlighting different features and changing its own language over the course of the day and the year. And just a couple even more close details where you can see the iridescent details. The room is meant to be alive, playful, and interactive with different agendas during the day and at night. The last project is in Jamaica, in the hot, humid, tropical climate where interiors are best outside. I'm not going to talk too much about these, but I'm sharing them more to leave you with a set of questions to ask you as students, how do we define interiors? Or how do we dissolve or reframe our understanding of interiors and the future practice of design? For example, in this image, can it be felt as an interior space by the scale of the furniture, the spatial agent of the room, the shade overhead, and the immense views on either side? Same for this space, even though the ground is wet. Or this breezeway space, enclosed on one side and open on the other. The changing shadows of light cast on this space creates new textures, wallpapers, and floor patterns. Our perception changes as the sun moves through, challenging our ideas and notions of how we use the space. It changes from a place that is hot and exposed to one filled with shadows and protection in just one day. I leave you with this very exterior image in mind to consider the boundaries between interior and to consider how the boundaries between interior and exterior can dissolve through simple frameworks, allowing the opportunities for spaces to be designed as adaptive stages for movement, perception, and performance, and where experience completes the design.
Hi guys, can you hear me? My name is Esther Beckett, and I'm the studio director and founder of Studio Front. I have spent the last 12 years dedicated to producing a lot of interior design work. And these last couple of years doing quite a bit of reflection as I set up Studio Front. And I'm taking the opportunity to present to you today to discuss how we at Studio Front value a variety of aspects of the work that we do to potentially inspire you to think of the opportunities your own professional future will bring about to embed your work with the values that you believe in. This is an ever-evolving subject for me, and at the moment I will show you the foundations of it. So we'll start off with the nature of things. Central to our practice is the discovery and acknowledgement of the intrinsic qualities that make up a project. These qualities relate to humans and their relationship to their environment, the material world that surrounds them, the project constraints and collaborators involved, and they reveal themselves throughout the project and will inspire and influence the design process, and with this, the end result. These ideas allow us to keep our minds flexible, attentive, and responsive to the particularities of each project. And I will showcase some of these ideas by walking you through aspects of 3 very different projects. The first idea is humans and their relationship to their environment. And for that, I'll talk a little bit about this Brooklyn school, which is currently on the design phase. It's a K through 12 all-boys school for students with social, emotional, and behavioral challenges. The school has a very interesting curriculum that is not only dedicated to your traditional educational coursework, but is enriched also with therapeutic services to support and enhance the students' lives. From the beginning of the project, it became clear to us that we couldn't just rely on the directors of the school to understand their needs and some of the challenges that the staff was facing. So we ended up designing surveys to reach out to the variety of therapists and trying to understand some practical issues that they were dealing with, but also to try to understand the student body and some of the challenges. We accompanied that with site surveys and interviews and a lot of observation, and we gained quite a lot of insights. Some of them, again, on the practical end, and then some of them more on the human kind of end. And the biggest and most compelling one turned out to be that we understood that the students need help with sensory integration. They are often either overstimulated or understimulated, so anything we could do to help regulate that would be incredibly beneficial. And so the foundation for the concept of this project became sensorial regulation. And basically, we worked really hard on developing a palette of colors that could become kind of like your reference point for all the finishes that would be chosen throughout the spaces. And this palette would be warm and inviting, would reference nature so that it could be soothing, would allow for some stimulation, but would be done in a very gentle way. And these would be, applied throughout spaces as highlights. So for example, the classrooms would have, certain walls that would be painted a certain way, then layered with other materials. We would use areas with very soft lighting. And then, for example, with the classrooms, we ended up developing this palette that I'm actually very happy with because it feels good and it's doesn't feel institutional and doesn't feel gendered either, which I thought was really sweet. And the coloration was applied throughout the spaces for defining floors to help students circulate throughout the building and highlight certain, design features from the architectural end. And then this is just showing you how, the basis of the coloration ended up transpiring into all the finishes that needed to be chosen. And now we move on to the idea of the surrounding material world, and I'm going to be showing you an apartment in Brooklyn that was done while I was at my previous firm, Formative, and it's being completed still today. A very interesting aspect to this project was, a very interesting aspect of this project, which speaks of how each one of us considers the material world, was the fact that the clients came to us with very specific references. These guys loved horror films from the 70s, so a lot of the research that I had to do was involved with these films, like watching them and kind of like distilling some of the visual information that I could get. And this was one of the biggest ones that they're big fans of, The Eyes of Laura Mars, which had this like incredible central space in this apartment that spoke so much about entertaining a certain mood, and just these like very tonal finishes. And so the work for me in designing this was figuring out how do I use this inspiration and just reference it, but putting it in a modern contemporary context so that, you know, it's its own unique vision. And so a lot of work was put into this like tonal approach to materiality, obviously also providing a lot of functionality for them. And so these are no, I don't have final images of this, but this was an in-progress shot of this like big unit that was in the living room. It provides a bar area. It has an area to play records. It has a TV and a setup because they're, you know, watch a lot of movies and a lot of storage for them. So it's very highly functional. And then these are just images showing you how these this palette and these materials end up kind of like spreading throughout the space, layering very softly, and then also using some of these references that are very fun from the 70s, like their obsession with like carpeting and how we can integrate that into the architecture of the building. And like that, we had to look at a couple of other films to try to understand the color palette that they were thinking of and that they were attracted to. So how do we apply that throughout the apartment? They're big Barbra Streisand fans, if you haven't noticed. And then applying them in a variety of ways. And then some other films, you know, looking at application of wood paneling, of fields of color, and how could that be integrated into their design. And so we developed, you know, a palette of finishes and design details that work volumetrically with these spaces that were kind of awkward and tight to provide function, but also to respond to the client's like desires. And I want to take a moment here to talk about collaborators, which is a very important thing for us. We in our field, and I actually say this to my own students, is that anything that is good in life takes a village. And this is what happens when we do work in the physical world. And finding the teams that you can work with that can help you bring your vision to life, that are excited to work with you, is a very important thing to have. And I think it's very important to acknowledge. It is often that you run into people who are not in the field who don't understand what it takes to do everything that you're doing, that it takes 3 men and 5 hours to hang this light fixture so that your vision can come to life. And so it's an important thing to keep in mind. And then on the other end, one of the things that I've been trying to incorporate more into my practice is actually bringing in colleagues and friends to work with me to kind of expand this like creative approach to other fields. And so in this case, this is a very close friend of mine, Justin Crawford, who's has a lighting brand, Glow, and he's a lighting designer, worked with me. He designed a few light fixtures, and it was, you know, a very beautiful collaboration. He lives in Australia. We had to like, you know, coordinate a lot, get, you know, the pieces designed very beautifully by him, finding the manufacturers in China, in Australia, in the Czech Republic, and then come to Brooklyn and deal with the problems that you deal with when you're assembling. So there was an opportunity here for the project to, you know, to have some really beautiful and special objects in it. And so the last thing I want to say about this is that the clients let me know further down the line when we had started construction that the reason they ended up working with me was that they felt like I would be working collaboratively with them, that I wasn't going to come in and impose my vision, but that I was going to listen to them and try to understand what it is that they're talking about. And I think that this is a very beautiful takeaway from a relationship like this that allowed me to feel comfortable with developing a language that is very specific to them. And with that, I want to talk about this idea of designing context. So there are certain common visual traits that you'll find in our work. They involve ideas of simplicity, honesty, and functionality, and are the physical manifestation of our values. but it is the nature of things that is at the core of our design language, making design most importantly contextual. As a result, our work is not visually homogeneous, nor does it intend to be. It is instead a response to the diversity of qualities that are unique to every project. This idea is something that took me a while to come to terms with, since we work in a market that often forces us to create a very defined brand identity that is then imposed on the work that we do. And this approach challenges the interest that I have personally with looking at the singularities of each project and working with them. So this is a lobby in the Upper East Side, and this lobby was done while I was at Formative, again, my previous studio. And just like the two previous projects, the context of this was one, the context of this one was foundational to our design approach, and it led to the actual design concept and design decisions that we're taking throughout the process. Again, a project that we really needed to look at the existing conditions and what the clients brought in terms of issues. This is a lobby that felt very outdated, not in terms of feel and look, but also it was outdated in terms of its function. We spent quite a bit of time observing the traffic patterns, the kind of people that live in the building, the kind of activities that are done there, to develop a program that made sense, that provided them with a variety of storage, since our, the way we consume today is very different than back then. We provided seating for the elderly so that they could wait to be picked up, and we took advantage of certain areas to add features to allow you to walk through the space. And within my process, I spent actually a lot of time putting together mood boards and finding the exact images that I want to show the clients, and that gets translated into the design. And it then gets into a lot of iteration to find the right forms, the right functions. And this is a very exhaustive project. And then in that process too, you get the clients that throw you curveballs, like, oh, now we want to integrate this whole section of the building into your original design, and you have to work with them to do that. And then some other curveballs that are actually really beautiful. In this case, the client changed their minds, and they wanted to have a terrazzo, a poured on-site terrazzo floor, which was an incredible thing to work with. These are people, very skillful people. There's not a lot of them that know how to do this in this country. And it was just really challenging to provide them with what they needed logistically, but it was also really beautiful to see them work. And so this was the end result, which I feel really happy about. It's obviously a very high-end, but it also a lot like highly functional space with a lot of integrated technologies in it that you actually don't see. So one last idea I want to share with you is that I have shown you a lot of the backbones of our process, because it is our process that, it is our process that makes up our lives. This is how we spend most of our time. It's important that we acknowledge it so that we can let it inform our decisions, but also learn to appreciate it as much as these beautiful final images, so we can showcase to others beyond our field the complexity of the work that we do. I think this is particularly important in the times that we live in, where we are so focused on perfect images that blur the lines between the real and the digital, that many end up unaware of the effort it took to get to this place. These are a lot of evolving ideas that I shared with you today, and I hope that they will add to the conversations that you guys are having here. You have opportunities to carve your own path with intention, to develop your own set of values, and to do your own practice around those values. Thank you.
And well, very, very, very thank you. I hope the students are aware of this quality of your work and inspiration that you bring to the community of designers. So thank you. And I guess I'm going to start with Esther. So your work invite us to see each project as a process of uncovering, of noticing, listening, and responding. How do you know when a project has revealed enough of itself to guide the design direction? And how do you hold space for that kind of slowness in a profession that often rushes towards solutions?
Well, I will first say that I wish there was slowness. There's actually no slowness. This is something that I think we struggle, I don't know, at least me in the field, there's a lot that we are asked for from our clients and from the city and from whomever it is that you're working with. I don't know if I know exactly what I know. I think it's hard to pinpoint it, but I will say something that there are often moments where you look at something that you just did that might be silly, might be just a sketch, something that, doesn't look finished, and you're so like, wow, like I arrived at something and this is it. Like I know from now on I need to go with it and this makes all the sense. Those moments for me take a lot of effort. Like I do like to exhaust all my possibilities. This is what I do. I'm like thinking about it. I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna try this until I find the one that I feel comfortable with.
So iteration.
A lot of iteration.
A lot of iteration, students. We talk about this.
Exactly.
Great. Thank you, Esther. I'm just gonna do one question for Gia now. In a different kind of way, Gia's work engaged with the ephemeral and celebratory. From the parade floats to site-specific installations, often situated between interior and exterior. How do these spatial narratives reshape our understanding of permanence in interior design, especially in a moment where design is being asked to respond urgently to environmental and social change? So, for example, how can interior design, I think, in other words, how can interior design be more defined where you are talking about making it sort of disappear, and how that could, no, I know, that's like synthesis.
Reframe it.
Okay, reframing.
I don't know. I'm not totally sure if I understand the question, but I'll try to answer it anyway.
Okay, yes,
Answer it.
all right.
But I think that I just think that interiors in contemporary kind of dialogue doesn't need to be confined to just interior space, and it doesn't need to be permanent. It can be something temporal, and it can be something that questions itself in terms of interior and exterior. And I think with climate change and the urgency of thinking about kind of what materials define interior space and the kind of objects inside the space, spatial kind of agents that define what interior space is. I think we have to think in terms of less is more and what those objects are. So
Sounds like a response. Thank you, Gia. Thank you, Esther. But I just want to, remain in that what you just said about how interior design doesn't have to remain interiors, no? And we are going to see more of that in the second round of speakers. But, I encourage all the students to think about the practice that you just seen. They're both woman-led practices as well, which is many students are in the school and they're questioned, like, what should we do? Should I do my practice? Should I go work on a practice, on a larger and go out there and start like having projects, be strong and remain there and keep getting projects. And so if you can talk a little bit about that, just to wrap up.
Well, I mean, just to like tail end a little bit on the last question, for me, design, like interior design or landscape design or architecture design, it's all kind of the same thing, or furniture design. It's design. It's really how you think about, it's how you, industrial, yes, and we do that too. We do that too in our studio. It's how you think about it. It's how you frame your intentions and ideas and values. And I think that goes into practice too. So whether you're thinking about doing something on your own or doing something or working for other people, you have to bring your ideas to both aspects. You could be incredible leaders in other offices and collaborators.
Collaborators,
For
I was
sure.
gonna say, yeah.
So I, you know, as students, I would just think about like where your interests are and how to just keep navigating that path and be open to wherever it goes, you know? And I think leadership can be defined in so many ways, and it's just about kind of having intentions and desires and moving through that.
Thank you, Gianna. Ideas.
I'll say, like, tagging along, I think that, you know, when you design, you develop a certain way of looking at the world and problem solving, and I think that can be applied to so many things. And in the end, what I would recommend is that you check in with yourself along the way to see what makes sense for you, because having your own business requires a certain kind of personality, or, you know, like, you know, you have to take risks, you know, you have to like do it all, you know,
Yeah.
clean the floors and
Do
like,
it all.
install
Do your coffee.
install CAD and like, yeah, exactly. And, you know, you can work at an office that allows you to focus on certain things and develop a career that might feel safer for you, you know, and I think that all of them are good as long as they feel good to you. Yeah, and I think that, you know, just like staying true to yourself, you're always gonna face challenges, you know, like working with people, collaborating, it's tough, you know, but like there's like a lot of opportunities to learn and grow. So it's about taking those.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Open to any questions from the students, the presenters. Any questions? Yeah? Okay. Thank you, Lydia.
I think specifically during the presentation, you talked about sensory regulation in the school. I just wanted to know, like, using colors to like separate flooring and like help wayfinding, how did you kind of reach that decision to go that way? Or I know the decision you made there, but just the process behind that and how that is being cultivated because it's not finished.
That project has been really interesting because I've never worked with a population like this, and we are today, I think, more aware of certain things, but we're still like, you know, if you're not in this specific world or like, you know, experiencing the world in certain ways, it's hard to do that. I think that, you know, the amount of talking that we did with the therapist and just observing space, and you know, like we have this ability to like see chaos. I don't know, like this happens to me that I'm like this, like if you could provide some organization and some standards, like things just recede and then you can focus on other things. Like these are things that have happened in my practice, and I feel like with the observations that I did there and listening, I realized that this was actually like really important. And that organization comes from also color organization, you know. I think that there's something very interesting, you know, like we think that in the design, sometimes you know, like, it's just like aesthetic. Aesthetic is not just something that is just there, right? Like, it responds to things, right? And so there's a lot of functionality in the choices that we make. And I think that this is what's beautiful about what we do, is that we can challenge ourselves to think about it and be like, why am I choosing this? You know, like, why is it that it's this pink and not this other pink? And so I feel like this is what happened there, is that, you know, like, we were looking for the meaning behind every color that was there and how it worked together.
So in a way, like testing, or the research comes from, the decisions come from talking with the,
With talking.
Talking,
No
yeah.
testing.
yeah, there is
It's like a
no
little trick.
guidelines, so many guidelines. I hope these students are thesis students, so they deal with like
Yeah.
neurodiversity
Yeah.
in design.
Yeah, but you know, I will say is that we have tools to like kind of like prove our concept, even if it's not the most scientific way of doing that, you know, where you can do renderings or sketches, or like you put materials together, you photograph it, you collage it, and that I really feel like that stuff speaks to us, you know, like we are also sensorial people, and we will respond to those things.
Okay. One more question? Okay, great. Thank you, Ms.
Okay, I would like to ask my question, who's your role? When designing, do you think that it's important that each design create holds depth and significance, and how are your projects significant?
The answer is yes. Every project, I've been lucky, I feel like I've had really great projects come through somehow. Most of the time, there's a client and an agenda behind the project that is really interesting, and the relationship between the two are the things that drive the project and provide meaning to the project. So there's nothing that I have never worked on a project that is just for money, say, although money is important to keep going. It's not the driving factor. The driving factor is who the project is for and what the project is. And so there's meaning in that. That sort of answer the question.
Yeah, I think so, because we have a project where the students choose the client, no? And so the idea of having a client as a constraint, I think it's part of it.
Yeah, I mean,
What you're saying.
if there isn't a relationship, a friendship in some capacity with a client, and if the intent of the project, even if it's a private project or commercial, whatever, isn't interesting from some perspective,
The guard.
then I'm not that interested. But you know, the bar is for a musician who has a business in their house and she lives in the house. So the room itself already has a tension, you know, a kind of day-night tension and a private public, so not public, but private business kind of used to it. So embedded in that is meaning. And that's like a very exciting starting point for the project.
Thank you. Yeah. Francesca. Any other questions?
We have time for
One more?
additional questions.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, I have a question for each of you. One for you, Esther. I just wanted to know, when it comes to, because I was looking at a lot of your designs and I realized that, you know, in terms of like color composition and texture, I just wanted to know what moved you to go through that process, and is color like your main focus? Is texture your main focus? How did you get there? You know?
It's very funny because I taught color theory for like 10 years. But it's just happened in my life. I don't know, like it's not, it like came to me. I think, you know, I think the physical experience of a space to me is so moving. And the attention that we pay to everything that goes in there, even the simplest of things, like choosing paint. I mean, maybe not simple, actually it's actually really hard, but you know, can seem simple. they influence how you experience that. And I think that I've become very sensitive to that.
No, I love that answer.
Gia, column, texture, who comes first? Both or was another? Oh, okay, go ahead, moderator.
Because I remember, one of your structures that had like this underground sort of part in the beginning. And I was so moved by it when I first saw it. I was just like, structurally, that's amazing. Like what process was that for you? What were you trying to convey to people when you were first thinking of, like, how did it just like pop into your head? How did you like go about that whole process? I wanted to know if it was like, is the intention to kind of just like, because in my mind, I'm like, if this is a real thing that you go into, definitely like this sort of vibe of, how do I describe it? Like subversion. Is it supposed to be subversion? Is it supposed to be like elevating you? Like how were you thinking about like the overall, movement of that space?
I'm not exactly sure which project.
Which project?
The first one where you had, I think you were talking about like in a park where there was a top layer with all of these like geometric shapes and then a bottom layer of
I
a
think it's,
different shape.
It's like a cylindrical building that you go in and it has two layers. So the question is how it influenced it or?
Yeah, what influenced it and how did you intend for people to like, in that installation, like be in it? Like what was that?
The idea was really that you continue to move in it and that it had the kind of two layers of it and the kind of pushing and pulling on the kind of perimeter of it allowed for a kind of mixing of program and sort of challenging the idea of the performer and the spectator, which is like coming from a lot of the kind of real right research and being in the streets and all of that stuff that you're confronted with, like you're kind of watching, but you're participating at the same time. So it was on an architectural scale, similar ideas of watching, but also being part of the performance at the same time. And so there were different opportunities where you could, by kind of pushing the upper perimeter out, you create little balconies, like almost like in an opera, like the little balconies that you see. And they could be both stage and kind of audience spaces. So, yeah.
Yes, I love the project. The interaction, the closeness between the performer and the spectator, that's, if you are into theater as well, like, or set design or stage design, you will probably go through learning about this aspect. Yeah.
Those ideas actually, that was a very formative program, but the same ideas get played out even in residential projects that have, like, you have private spaces and your social spaces in residential projects. And I love where those moments of shared space can be inflected differently, like that it's not like how you perform in a living room, say, can shift. It doesn't have to be so classically living room or so classically hallway, that these ideas can shift in different ways. So those ideas just play out in all different program projects, I would say.
Yes, that's great.
Hi. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so I have a question for both of you guys. How has your project shaped who you are as a designer as well as who you are in your personal life? Like, have they ever clashed before?
Same question for both of us. No, I mean, I feel like everything's a big struggle, like life is a struggle, work is a struggle, but it's like a struggle with passion. So there's no difference. It's all, because I run my own practice, it's an extension of me, but it's also very much connected with who is a part of it, and how they impact it and what they bring to the table and how it can grow and shift and change. I don't know, that I have no difference between work and life. It's all kind of the same thing.
I have to agree with you. I will say there's a lot of struggle, and most of it to me comes from our human interactions more than anything. You know, it's like I was talking to someone a few weeks ago. I think they worked in something not related to design. They worked, I don't know, some like company. And they said to me, they're like, wow, why do you do so hard? Because every project you have is like starting off with a whole new team, like getting to know it. And I was like, that is true. I mean, you have to develop a lot of skill to work with people and to suit people. I mean, at least in the construction end, when you're working with private clients, wow. it's like
Manage
a
expectations.
lot of management, a lot of management. So like staying, you know, sometimes staying on track and staying sane is about figuring out how to handle that, you know?
I would say though that it's, when you have a creative approach to your design, is the same word, you want to use this? Let me try it, this better. When you have a creative approach to your design practice, it's a lot of like one step forward, two steps back, and eventually you kind of get there. And that's only because you are constantly confronted with newness. And there's a little bit of the same, but there's a lot of newness in each project. But there are paths where you can be a little bit more streamlined and a little less creative in a certain way, like more like a narrower scope maybe of what you do so that you can have like in your pocket how to do things much quicker, much faster. That's not really my approach, but it is an approach.
Totally, if you want to do like a specialization, for example,
Yeah.
now you
Yeah.
start to have things that repeat because you are working on one genre, let's say hospitality or, you know, health and design, for example, then you start learning things that work and that create like a little bit more.
So, like, if you end up working with a wide variety of projects like what I do, it's challenging because the kinds of issues you're dealing with and the kinds of teams you're dealing with are very different. But I am such a curious person that I could not do just one thing, which would be easier for me, but that's not the path that I chose.
That's great. Variety. So, no more questions. We can wrap up this session.
I have
I don't-
one last question, which I think might be relevant for the students, Charles, on what you also mentioned in your presentation when you were introducing, when we were talking about the fact that in the nature of things, your design attitude, the fact that it's expected by designers to have a specific style that is unique and recognizable, that yours instead is diversity, embraces the diversity. And recently we had interesting conversations with first year students on representation of interiors. And I see some slight differences between the ways in which you both represent your interior spaces. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about that so that hopefully it's going to inspire students.
I mean, I love what you wrote about the design in context. I feel like that resonates so much with me as well. And I would say a little bit, that's probably why every project is a little bit different. You know, they are so much about context, it's about program, it's about the client. So, I mean, I think people who work with me will see the threads that kind of move through the projects similarly, but they are flexible, you know, and there's a lot of diversity in it.
And you were asking about the actual representation, how we represent.
Use collage.
Yeah, you know,
Collage.
Exactly.
I love this collage of what did you call it? The structure,
The rotunda.
the rotunda, sorry. That those collages are so beautiful. I will say, you know, that part of what can make your practice really fun as a creative person is like, you know, coming up with ways of representing. Like the other day, I reached out to a friend who has a cricket machine to see how I can integrate it into the way that I represent something, you know, grabbing pens. I've done that where you grab different kinds of pens and do the same drawing, scan it, layer it, and then get somewhere. It's really fun. You know, it's a fun thing to do, and you can land into different spaces also, like in terms of like your aesthetic language, even you can end up like, you know, allowing you to think of something else you hadn't thought of. And so I think that today you guys have a lot of technologies that you can play with, you know, and it's just like, it should be fun, you know, like that. This is really like the fun part, is like the creative, expressive part of it. Yeah.
It's great. Just to say, yeah, both fantastic way of doing. It's very much also. So, inspiring for the students in both ways. You know, thank you very much.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the second part of the Interior Design Symposium, Designing Future Interiors. We are very happy to start our second part of the symposium that is devoted to the topic of experimenting and more. We will have two speakers that will, and the first one of them is Michelle Gorman. So please help me welcome Michelle to the podium.
Great. So thank you so much, Florencia and Francesca, for inviting me here today. And thank you for those who stayed. Can everyone hear me?
Not so well.
No?
Get closer to the microphone.
Closer to the mic?
Yes.
Okay, that works. Okay, great. So thank you for the introduction earlier. I'm director of the Parsons Interior Design Program just down the street at Union Square. So we are very close, and don't be a stranger, come visit. Let's see. I'm the thought leader here in terms of inclusive design pedagogy, immersive interiors, objects, and technology at the school. And I practice on the new school, which is the unceded land of the indigenous Lenape people. And I collaborate with collaborators in Khoi land in South Africa, in Turrbal and Nugara land in Australia. So my contribution today to this awesome prompt on the future of interiors is really looking at the future of interiors, interior design education in this context of this rapidly shifting ideological domestic and global landscape that we have found ourselves in. That's changing week by week. I'm asking, how can we remain inclusive and give agency on the making of our interiors with and as those who have been historically left out of the design process? So as we deal with new challenges each day, as you said, including the language we were able to use as DEI is being dismantled, can we use a word like inclusive anymore? It actually has been banned on the list. Can we use the word radical anymore in this climate?
No more radical?
Good question. No more women. This is an illegal lecture that I'm giving. The question I ask is, how can we create spatially inclusive design education that co-authors with stakeholders and designers beyond the boundaries of our institutions and our national political boundaries, which may become more relevant? So here, playing the language. And even questioning the term future as a design provocation in terms of our future unknown. So my own pedagogical research practice and co-authored project, the Radically Inclusive Studio, is relevant inclusive pedagogical framework once again for this moment. Started during the global pandemic and the move of the design studio online with colleagues Dr. Hermie Delport, Yolanda Vega in South Africa, and Lindy Burton in Australia. We asked how design education has become or can become more accessible, equitable, and inclusive in this moment. And how did this disruption of the traditional model of in-person design studio-based education reveal inequities, as well as potential opportunities to transform the design studio with our students? and to create connections to solve shared wicked problems that transcend the boundaries of our universities, cities, and countries, such as the issue of the climate crisis. So we met online as participants in a global architectural education seminar where we discovered alignments in our feminist pedagogical philosophies and our inclusive teaching approaches. We found strength in each other's stories, and our ensuing conversations were provocative and propositional. Informed by a collective feminist research practice, we shared our experiences and positions on oppressive practices in the profession, ingrained in architectural education. We could sympathize and support, interrogate and discuss, provoke and test, think and ideate together. The global pandemic proved to be a powerful catalyst that compelled us to rethink the state of design education and imagine an alternative. So through a partnership, we co-authored a 6S framework, including systemic, structural, support, social justice, symbolic, and spatial inclusion, with recommendations on advancing inclusivity through the design studio. We updated a previous framework that was built around disability justice and extended it through an original contribution, spatial inclusion, creating access and agency within design education. And so we co-published in Routledge Companion to Architectural Pedagogies, the Global South, and tested the framework within our own programs and studios. Our work and research is shared openly on our website, where you can join the conversation. We have given over 30 inclusive pedagogy workshops online, coming together for the first time in person in 2023 at the Cape Town Institute of Architecture with professionals and educators and the University of Cape Town students in architecture and interior design. So we see the future of inclusion in design education beyond the boundaries of our universities as we move into a rapidly changing world once again. So we were thrilled last week to be recognized by the Architectural League of New York through their Feminist Spatial Practices website and Matrix that just launched. So you can check out some more of the project there if you're interested. So as I said, we're testing this within our own universities, and we continue to develop it with our students in our home institutions. And then we work with each other as sounding boards to see, in relationship outside of our national politics. So as this talk is very short, I'm gonna just share one of the many projects that emerged from this research, a decolonized, decarbonized dinner party hosted at Parsons with myself, my MFA Interior Design program, and students and directors of industrial and textile design, Yvette Chaparro, and Preeti Gopinath from textiles. So putting into practice our recommendations on interdisciplinary collaborations and co-authorship with global students and alumni, openly sharing knowledge, community building with each other, dismantling grading structures, and spatially including institutions such as University of Cape Town, and now RMIT will collaborate with us this year from Melbourne. So we define decolonization in design as prioritizing Indigenous knowledge and methodologies, using locally inclusive non-colonial frame of reference. We define decarbonization as the reduction of carbon emissions. McCurdy 2022 emphasizes that the goal is not to literally decarbonize, but to rethink how carbon is used, identifying where it can be redirected to benefit the planet. As designers, we are responsible for reimagining material choices and processes to mitigate ecological degradation while promoting social equity and environmental sustainability. So D&D, that we've abbreviated to, which helps our code switching for language, works to share knowledge and discussions around our shared mission of equity, inclusion, and social justice. In a time of unprecedented change, we foster the skills, values, and vision vital to create a more integrated, equitable, and delightful world. So we begin to map out areas of research focus, climate justice between EISJ and carbon, biogenic systems between circular design and carbon, and regenerative economies and material health between EISJ and circular design. And so activating the mission is a key phrase, namely in a time of unprecedented change. Decolonization starts in the design studio through our radical pedagogy we put into practice. We utilize interdisciplinary design collaboration following our co-authored framework on decolonization and decarbonization between our disciplines, using design to explore food and water systems as a starting point to work towards climate justice. I know we talked a little bit about collaboration in the earlier discussion too, and so we see this process of participation and co-authorship as key to this process. We were intentional to design as a community. The dinner table is a communal space that reframes the way we collaborate as, not for or with, not for our community. We challenge the space of the present and defend design review crit, traditional in the design studio. We see our practice informed by care, compassion, and love, with both community, climate, and social justice as the outcome. Who is at the table matters. Working in the US with a diverse student body from colonized contexts such as India, South Africa, Taiwan, and Brazil, as well as students from colonizing countries. Emphasizing indigenous methodologies in our creative practice is in fact theoretical pedagogy. We use indigenous research methodologies such as listening circles and oral storytelling practices around decolonizing and decarbonizing design within and from diverse global contexts. Through our cultures, rituals, and lived experiences, we explore suppressed practices and knowledges that offer solutions to the intertwined crisis of colonialism and our climate crisis. Oops. So knowledge is shared within our Parsons community and abroad. Dialectic thinking refers to the ability to view issues from multiple perspectives and to arrive at the most economical and reasonable reconciliation of seemingly contradictory information and positions. Go here, our first decarbonized dinner party in 2022, I think it's this one, yes, brought attention to the impacts of global warming on New York City communities, which were heightened due to the pandemic, affecting global food supply chains and distribution, resulting in food insecurities. We all live through it. As designers, we are in a unique position to address how design can mitigate this problem, not only through our everyday rituals, but through the materials we use in design, seeing waste as a resource to design with. As our manifesto states, we must translate food waste reduction and reuse practices into the design of the built environment. So we hosted 4 workshops that practice community design making through making with food waste, including its packaging. Alumna Sam Bennett from MFA Interior Design, currently working on her PhD on repair systems in design, shared methods and processes around experimentation and regenerative biomaterials from food waste such as corn, coffee grinds, orange peels. So here we see a cup of coffee made from a cup of coffee and a bowl made from corn husks. We were having a discussion earlier about products that our alumni have now brought to market as a result. So Uyan Tran, MFA Textiles alumna, and their partner Ross McPhee presented their progress with chitosan biomaterial in the form of leather through their company Tomtex, named one of the most influential designers of our time now. Product designer faculty Dana Diamico and interior design faculty Yunnan Ku presented their research with mycelium and pizza box reuse to create acoustic panels for interior applications. We found that mycelium loves greasy pizza boxes from New York City. Our sharing and listening circle was inspired by Judy Chicago's feminist dinner party, which championed community art making and validated voices at the margins of art and design to engage difficult social justice topics. It also validated forms of domestic labor, such as crafting. And so our dinner embodies material practice that works towards the mitigation of carbon through the design process and materials we use. So here we collaborated with the Billion Oyster Project on Governor's Island, and students this is one student here's research where they were replacing cementatious material within concrete with oyster shells and colored glass that can't be recycled. So replacing the kind of harmful concrete aggregate to make a less carbon-intensive concrete. So the workshops taught by part-time faculty and alumni just highlighted engaged students to produce healthier and regenerative offerings for the dinner party. Objects such as tables, plates, candelabra, and linen were used to set the stage for the event. An example of the pieces featured in the dinner party included this project from Parsons textile design student called I Lied to Myself. This is Not About Maize by Eliza Literal. A piece that was knitted on domestic knitting loom, dyed with natural dyes, and incorporates parts of the familiar corn maze from kernel to husk. It explores the intrinsic relationship between humans and maize or corn, since its origins and the value of every part of this plant indigenous to the Americas, reminding us the glory days of when Inca's gold was the backbone of the Inca Empire 6,000 years ago, and went on to become the largest commodity crop in the United States. And questioning how nowadays material has lost its value, with half of the corn husks being burnt in open fields. MFA Interior Design Sam Tung brings new perspectives to interior design through her own decolonial framework, using innovative shared kitchen typologies and intergenerational knowledge sharing in New York City, where she's from. So she's addressing very clearly, she reclaims stories of making in a diasporic Chinese community. And so this is some of the decolonizing kitchen typologies within NYC, centering Chinese Americans in response to anti-Asian hate post-pandemic. 2023, we came back with a second version of Decarbonized Dinner Party with reframing our relationship to water and design. So I was invited to the University of Cape Town in South Africa and presented our project, inviting students and faculty to participate. Starting off the symposium, including the University of Cape Town. And oh yeah, this is our symposium, and moderated by Maria Linares Trellis from Parsons. So University of Cape Town's Heidi Bollinger discussed her research on landscapes of memory, which focus on exploring decolonial narratives through spatial and architectural lenses in the aftermath of apartheid. Sustainability and Inclusivity, Water, Food, and Architecture by Chisomo Fury from the University of Cape Town addressed the significance of water as a resource and its complex access relationship within local communities. And they had just experienced day zero in South Africa, where they had to begin to ration water. Cochina Telerinas, sorry, a collective from Peru and Egypt, asked us to reframe our relationships to our local water bodies in design, reconnecting our rituals of cooking as a metaphor for discussing design, collaboration, and decolonization. And so Parsons students from our different disciplines came together to frame their projects as recipes around water in a workshop, also directed by Peruvian scholar Maria Linares Trellis. The dinner party of 2023 happened in April on Earth Day, this time on the carbon neutral Governor's Island in New York in front of Barrett Roth's Circular Manufacturing Mini Factory. Students participated with their projects in the form of recipes that were read aloud within the framework of a listening circle. So I captured the public dinner table through a lighter scan on Governor's Island, including recipes shared by our collaborators at the University of Cape Town. So they would send us recipes on a Moreau board, and we would recreate it for them. And then we would take a photograph and send it back. And so the 3D scan, we're able to share it virtually and can be exhibited through augmented reality using Polycam in design studios at their location. So the work of design students, including textile making techniques such as natural dyeing with indigo, botanical dyes, eco-printing, bioplastic material development, hand weaving, hand spinning, crochet, knits, and basketry. Recipe for Being Alive featured textiles that would serve as coasters and doilies for the dinner table using yarn that was hand spun on a spinning wheel, crocheted into doilies by hand, and then use natural indigo dye from a reusable indigo vat to dye textiles in the most environmentally conscious process, indigenous to India from pre-colonial times. Mara Zimmerman, Seed Innovation, was looking at revaluing the waste stream. So in this case, using chitin sourced from shell byproducts of the fish industry. Jessica Feast, Recipe for Synthesis, all about the potential of living algae-based materials, living with active objects that require our care and maintenance. And this is MFA Interior Design, Sydney Moss. Her project was all about water circularity in the home and caring for more than human species and returning water from the home cleaner than it came. So she was working with stormwater storage into the interior built environment of domestic spaces and designing systems that allow the user to visualize their daily water consumption. And so it maps the complex relationship of water sources from reservoirs to the home and back to the ocean. And so this is some of the her work was at her desk. You heard her awesome sketches to storytell this. Very complex process. And so here we see that water is getting reused within the home's interior building systems, and that water doesn't start when you turn on the water in your interior. This was Tatiana's Bathhouse Brewhouse from MFAID, which rethought circular interiors, adaptive reuse in a Brooklyn, in an old abandoned beer factory. And so adjust beer and water waste as a way to begin to remake the interior as well. And she actually owns a hotel in Greece and is putting a lot of this into practice right now, and leading a charge on circularity in care within hospitality. So when the conversation continues, this time we've launched it as an elective. So I think there's officially grades now in here, but it's still, so the elective itself opens itself up to experimentation, exploration. So students frame projects around new practices of making as part of a circular process of living. And our third dinner party was once again on Governor's Island with participation from students in the Decolonize, Decarbonize elective in our Interior Food Ecologies Design Studio in MFAID. And also included New York City chefs and local New York City designers. And so once again, the dinner table was archived through a 3D layer scan and then shared globally. Some of the cool projects that came out of that one, Staghorn Sumac ink, creating natural color inks using sumac leaves, iron, gum arabic, water. This was MFA Interior Design Shreya Diwali, Project Earthing Interiority, reimagining urban domesticity using locally forged materials. So she was challenging the globalized interior within New York City in these high rises that we have, these kind of white boxes that have kind of placelessness to them, and thinking about what if we begin to construct our interior from foraged materials itself, right? And so a different level of care going out and beginning to find your local objects in the local environment and fabricating them yourself. And this is in response to the interior is its most wasteful practice, right? We have gut renovations every 3 to 7 years. So we have a big responsibility here. So we have published 3 publications following the free dinner parties, the third published last week, and I have it here. So if you're interested in these books, as like with making recipes for your studios or pedagogical frameworks, I can share those links with you that are free to download and issue or print on demand. And so I will leave it here. I came here with an agenda. I want you to join with us this year on Governor's Island. And so it's April 19th. It's not exactly Earth Day, but it's Governor's Island. We'll be celebrating that day. And so you'll follow this link. You can fill out a form, and then you could submit your recipes to the Moreau board, or you could just come that day of and contribute to the table itself. You'll be photographed by this wonderful photographer, Martin Seck, who's a product photographer. He's wonderful. Be included in the book with credits to you and NYIT. So you'll be joining RMIT in Melbourne. So it'll be amazing. So this is the Moreau board, and this year's theme is on foraging. And we'll leave it open to you. So thank you so much. I didn't read too fast.
So we have a moderated discussion. My friends are working, and then we welcome the second speaker for the second part of the conversation. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. I think this was a very precious presentation as it introduces students to expanded interior design research practices that are very much geared toward a more global perspective. So they embrace not only global problems, but they engage with people all around the world. And it's also very interesting that you have engaged various disciplines in these initiatives. So interior design expands to other fields of knowledge, and I think interdisciplinarity is, we've seen how that is a very important part of interior design practice. It is also very interesting how you've shown us that design indeed, sort of interior design practices, design vision practices that engage with real life problem are oftentimes critical. And there's a series of theories that you've introduced, decolonization, we've spoken about feminism, etc., that support some of these very important design practices. So I have 3 questions for you, and then if we have time, I'll open it up to other questions with the rest of the the students that are here with us today. So I found and I could perceive a very strong sense of possibility of making positive change, given the, you said it gracefully, actually, unprecedented, moment of unprecedented change that we're living today. And it feels that designers, interior designers, especially young interior designers, do have the possibility to make positive change despite the difficult period we're living. So I was wondering whether you could tell us how that could happen, and what are your thoughts regarding the current circumstances and indeed how these young students, future designers, can make a positive impact despite difficulties.
It's a really great question. And yeah, I think it's, I don't know, you must have the answer right now, right? And I will say, I think the most important thing coming out of this is really to focus on our communities of universities and scholars together, and, you know, in their community with our students, and in connection with our current communities that maybe we haven't been focusing on as much in our immediate locations, right? I think it's interesting, interior design, we've always designed for communities, right? And I think, you know, we were talking about that earlier, right? Imposing our visions with them, but I think the immense power of designing as, right? And through our own life experience, you all are already experts at the issues that are rising within your communities right now. And so I think responding to that and tuning out the noise that's happening, I think is probably the most positive change you make right now, right? Yeah.
Yes, you know, paying attention to language and find very important reflection regarding narrative, embedded interior design, kind of language that we use and how we use it as a form of resistance, right? I have a second question that is very much grounded on what the interior design program is going through right now, which is the accreditation. Our students are very good at showing great expertise in all the technical codes and all the nuances of becoming skilled interior designers and work in the professional field. But you showed us also that there's a series of big questions that they might engage with if they wish to make positive, impactful change in the world once they leave university. Much of what you have shown us today was somehow radical, experimentative. It was collaborative once again, but you know, it was extremely inspiring. So my question is, how can the interior designers of the future, because we're talking about the future of interior design, how can interior designers of the future mediate between the, you know, the obligations associated to the discipline and the practice of interior design, the rules and regulations, and let's say dare a little bit more through radical, inclusive design practice, critical design practices as the ones that you've shown us today.
Congratulations. I know how much work that is, and our undergraduates going through that now. So we maybe point to you for advice. I just put together a panel at IDEC last week in Chicago on assessment accreditation, but at the graduate level. And so I got Megan Scallon there on the panel, who probably know very well.
Yes.
And it was a great conversation. I pulled together SCAD, Drexel, and BCU directors, but a lot of directors were there and chairs to have this discussion. And it's interesting, we were talking about those standards, right? And are they for our past practice? Are they responsive to the critical need of our future and allowing us to use our innovation from our own communities and places within that, or are we kind of bending the knee a little bit to it? And so it was a really interesting conversation around that. And I think, interior design has a larger story to tell than we're currently telling. And I think that's such a big one. And I think we should push back and open up those standards to become goals, right? Not for previous practice as it exists. So, even things like getting in the weeds, right? Like being able to challenge and reframe human-centered design, right? We're not designing just for the human experience anymore, right? We're having a huge impact on this planet and destroying other species as a result of the interior. It is not missing, right, in our wasteful practices. So I think there's opportunities for us to all push back on the profession and challenge that and say, hey, this is what we're going to comply with this. This is really helpful, but being purposely and challenging, so we're not being compliant in this area, and give reasons why. And so they were very receptive to that, which was really exciting, and opening up that conversation and bringing us all to the table. I think is most important things.
Right, yes, I think it's very interesting as a big conversation. Students have the luxury of being a little bit freer to explore and expand their career, right? Education careers, that's great. My very last question, just let's say, is inspired by the exceptional talk and the fact that the role of students is very much emphasized in this presentation as agents of change. The centrality of the students also in the conception of these projects is so important, and it reflects, of course, the centrality of humans in general, the practice. So as educator, what have you learned from the students through these exceptional experiences, be it regarding traditional indigenous practices, be it through their exchanges and the community that emerges out of it? So what have you learned?
There are so many beautiful stories, and I think we have a lot of international students at Parsons, so I think it's interesting. There, I think everyone here is. I'm sure everyone's here.
It's a mix.
It's a mix, and so I think it was really interesting to reframe how everyone's responding to the climate crisis, right? And in a very scientific way, right? And understanding that the climate crisis is a social problem. And so it was interesting asking students like how were you affected by the climate crisis, right? And what were previous rituals that may have disappeared? And so we heard some amazing stories. And one was a student from Columbia that, all of the textiles were made from, were dyed with a mineral in this river that dried up. And so that textile that dyed can never be made again in that same color in that same way. And so, she all of a sudden began to talk about water rights and advocacy through that project, and reframe the question for us as educators in a very different way. And I think giving away, right, the power we have as faculty, right, to begin to say this is the way we should do it, right, but have that turn around and for it to remove those like hierarchies with the class and really talk about their own frameworks or other stories that we're not hearing. It was really impactful. But it was an event that was outside of the class, and so it was all voluntary. I think there was a lot of students were asking, how are we going to address decolonization in design? It was like, well, we can't answer that, right? Like, and so we put on them, and it was really wonderful to hear, especially students from the context of India, about that resistance, a lot for textiles again, and to teach us as the whole community in classroom. And that was more about the peer-to-peer learning.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Michelle. We have 15 minutes for questions coming from the audience. Anyone has any question for Michelle Borman? Any question? Yes, we have one. Hello.
I am curious about your journey to get to this point of like the successful process, and not only how you, like, obviously it's such an important topic just in general, and have this kind of structure to then implement in other ideologies as well. But like where came the success of it now, and then what you're like doing in the future.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's interesting, we've heard of a lot of consciousness raising groups. I think Florencia and I were in Architects Together, which is a feminist design group.
Yes.
And yeah, we designed an exhibition together.
Quite hot, but yes.
And so I think it was really interesting being in that group, the consciousness raising group around feminism and design, and things we experienced individually or actually collective. And so it came out of that moment of really recognizing that, oh, there's a lot of oppressive tactics, right, that we could respond to. And so really came out of these feminist groups and design projects that we had done together. I think we had, we worked on this together, but there was one on the last abortion clinic in Mississippi, and we were creating that one together. And so we understood the importance of taking on a topic like this in design, and bringing in lawyers and medical doctors to the process, understanding that design doesn't happen alone, right? That is a larger community that we need to work with to address these really atrocious problems. And so I think that process and decentering ourselves as designer, as the sole designer, right, which is a fiction, right? You see that very well. In the process, I think we kind of built from those consciousness raising groups and working collectively.
Other question?
I myself am really inspired by this because I'm working on an essay that talks about decolonization within suburbia and like homes more specifically kitchens. And how we can within like the whole scale of the American dream kind of recenter those who are in this melting pot culture from other countries, because in other households, there are people that cannot necessarily function the way that the stereotypical housewife, in the nuclear family can function in the kitchen, and more communal and spacing. And so with the whole decolonization and a lot of the parties and like the food parties that you're talking about, like creating this kind of culture, I was wondering how, is there a way that you could suggest when designing to keep that in mind when potentially designing a home, like how can we make these spaces more, communal and open instead of the stereotypical rigid, a galley kitchen with this stove here and that stove there, and how do people function and how big should the cabinets be, like what should be the new standard for these families that have these like big pots and big pans that are also coming in and creating their own homes in suburbia.
Awesome question. You're reading like Dolores Hayden and yeah, that's in this faculty. Susanna Torre is also a great scholar as well, talking about Spaces Matrix. This is a great essay you should read about non-hierarchical space. We're doing an exhibition on it in November. I think just in response, I think, talking, every culture has different rituals. It also has different issues, I think, around it and relationship to women in space. And so I think what's really interesting is our ability as designers to listen deeply and really think like, what does it mean to challenge that kind of design process so you can really understand those culturally, and allow that kind of agency of someone to be able to say like, how do they want to situate themselves in that space? What is that relationship that they want to begin to have? And so I think, is it something you're designing with your community, or what's your project?
Mostly just like research about overall the difference between what was and what is going to be as more and more people enter into these spaces and homes and gain their own footing and establish their life in the middle class. And so I wanted to see if, again, challenging the design process, what should be the standard going forward? That's kind of like my end goal.
Communal design.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you have to invite the people,
Yeah.
talk to them.
Right.
When creating houses, when
I
creating
can't
certain
wait.
houses, I know that there's like a certain like precedent for like, there's this kind of kitchen and this kind of kitchen, and I know that communal design can look like so many different things, and so though it is specific kind of, it's also very broad, and I just wanted your suggestions because you're talking so much about diving into all these different cultures, and so how would you go about, creating the like new standard for those who need bigger spaces for this and that, and how do we, in a way that's like affordable again for the middle class that are coming in that want to change up their space to feel more like home. What should be the new precedent?
Focus on the standards. What we've seen today is a complex series of diverse approaches based on, not only the topic of discussion, but that specific.
But challenging the typology, I think that's the first thing, right? And recognizing where it has done harm or isolated women before, right? I think it's a really important one, right? What are the alternatives that you can begin to come up with? And then how do you invite people into the process to get feedback along the way and see what works for them, right? I think that's I would say as interior designers, our superpower is to begin to test things at full scale as well too, and bring community in, and have that begin to shape the process, right?
This is great, and may I add that this exceptional presentation and discussion really is a springboard for the following presentations that will deal with material explorations and sustainable practices. So I'm pretty excited that we started the second part of the symposium with your talk, and I suppose we can now give space to the next presenter, Andrew Dan, and please call for Michelle Warren.
You probably noticed me pacing around because I had my shoulder replaced a week ago. So I was in an incredible amount of pain, so I've taken a bunch of painkillers. Hopefully it'll be all right. If I start waving around a little bit, then just let me know. Okay. So my name's Andrew Dent. I run a materials consultancy in New York City. I've done for the last 25 years. My background is in material science, but I work with many of the world's major brands to help them find innovative and sustainable materials. I thought I'd take you through a crash course of sort of like where we are in terms of materials. And hopefully you can keep up. I'll try not to sort of go, it won't be too technical, but it's more just sort of like understanding of all the materials that we have, what do we have left, how much are we using, which should we be using. So yeah, this is up my library in Denmark, lots of material samples, 10,000 of them, but intended for all different types of, right? I've only got one arm there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay. There we go.
If you want.
This hanging thing. That's my library in Denmark. So I kind of want to take you through our material world. And this is one of the only graphs I'll have for you, but at least it's relevant. So we currently consume 100 billion tons of stuff every year. 100 billion tons. And you can see there. You see, okay, biomass, which is basically just things like trees and cotton and that sort of thing. Minerals, which are sand. You've got all sorts of vegetative chemistries as well. Ores, which is stuff to make metals out of, and then you've got fossil fuels. And of that, you've basically got a small amount, which ends up basically as plastic. So we're producing huge amounts of stuff every year with no real end in sight. Like of all these things, most of them may be inert, but they're not really, you can't really do much with them. After you produce something, then they're not getting recycled in any real way. So we need to understand that we're producing a bunch of stuff, but not really working out what to do with it in its life. So I want to talk quickly about circularity and sustainability. Okay, so there's a difference between these two. Okay, and I'm going to highlight that by this thing, which is the Boeing Dreamliner. Okay, it's the nose cone of a Boeing Dreamliner. So, in terms of sustainability, so in terms of circularity, this is a very bad idea because that material is carbon fiber. Carbon fiber doesn't recycle at all. It's a very toxic process. It's awful. But the reason why they make it out of carbon fiber and the reason why it's more sustainable is simply that it reduces the amount of jet fuel they need by such a significant amount that it's much better to use the nasty material than it is to use, let's say, aluminum or titanium, because at least with this, I'm reducing the amount of the jet fuel I use. So the statement at the top, there are no sustainable materials. It's true because you can have materials that have a recycled content, but if you're not using them in the right context, then there's no real value. So understand that it's more how you use the material than the material itself. Okay, difference between sustainability and circularity. This is circular, that's more sustainable. Because this thing I can recycle again and again. This thing I've got no real way of recycling. So that, although it's significantly reduced carbon footprint, by far, this is a much better choice for interested in sustainability, but this is where we should do the circularity, because at least I can recycle it again and again. There's no real way of recycling that. So understand there's a slight difference between the two. And obviously, you know, you've probably come across the differences between the way we are currently producing, which is through a linear process, and then how we should be producing, which is basically through a circular process. The way that nature does things in cycles, cycle life, the way water works in a cycle, we can do the same sort of thing as well with materials. It's just whether whether we're willing to. I'm going to go through a bunch of different material types. I hope you can understand then where we are with them, what we should be doing, etc., and some of the innovations. Yeah, this is a really stupid idea, but this was where I was a week and a half ago, and there is not every single surface there. Everything that wasn't covered in plastic was the surgeon's scalpel. Everything else is plastic. So understand that although this was bad, we've now got much greater healthcare, much more improved healthcare. You know, disposable products mean that we're a lot safer. So it has produced incredible amounts of safety and health benefits. Unfortunately, we just haven't found a really good way of disposing of it yet. Where are we using plastics? Everywhere. It's interesting though, like, you know, buildings, it's you guys, 18%. Got furniture, also you guys. A bunch of other things as well. But if you actually notice, the majority of plastics are actually just in single-use packaging. So when we concern ourselves with, like, should we be using plastic? Should we be using something else instead? Understand that these, which often have a very long life, like in a building, it's supposed to be there for like 50 years. This is the thing we need to concern ourselves with. So to a certain extent, I shouldn't worry too much about trying to reduce the amount of plastics you're using, whatever you're designing. Understand that they have a function, and if you're using them well, there's a reason why they're there, and they can have great value. What we need to be concerned about is the water bottles that we have here, and basically the packaging that we use for perhaps like 30 seconds and throw away. Okay, so a lot of clients are saying within retail interiors, within commercial interiors, we want to go plastic free. Okay, you can't. You just can't. Like this was someone's attempt at going plastic free with an interior. Basically, yes. So it was, I guess it was just a tease on sort of what you can do. But this was, I think, there was some mushroom, there was probably theory there, but without plastics, you know, you're sitting on plastic. You know, so understand there are concerns with the material, but also that it is a lifeblood of an awful lot of what we design. We can use recycled content. There are different ways of doing it. You can do it by mechanical recycling. So you basically chop this up into pellets and manufacture the products. You can also do it chemically as well. So understand that we have processes in place which allow us to recycle these things. The problem is at the moment, we're not getting it to where it needs to be, which is the recycler itself. So we can do that. And the advantage with this stuff, although it looks very weird and chemical, the advantage is, unlike this, whereas I can't, if I'm going to recycle a piece of plastic, let's say, I don't know, choose. Okay, this thing, right? You've got two different types of plastics. Three different ones, if you include the thing here. So you've got three different types of plastics. So therefore, it's very hard to recycle just one piece. Chemical recycling allows you to put it all in the same place. Put in tires, put in shampoo bottles, put all the plastic in, put it in a big sort of soup, and then basically we can work out how to then recycle all of that stuff. So it allows you a lot better comprehensive recycling. We're not doing it enough yet, but we're getting there. So understand that, yes, we're not ideal in terms of recycling, but we know what we should be doing. We can use recycled materials, and this is a chemical recycle. Remember, this chemical recycling. This is a material that's chemically recycled, and it produces virgin quality materials. So you can go back to what it was when you first manufactured it. And you can do that again and again and again. You can do it infinitely. So fibers for apparel, fibers for carpets, etc. We can also produce relatively high quality plastics for all sorts of other applications as well, in terms of furniture, whether it's packaging, and also things such as our translucent or transparent panels and things like poster coating. Okay, so we've also seen there's been a movement towards kind of when you are using recycled materials, actually promoting or showing that you're doing that, because people want to see that you actually, so this speckled effect may not be for everybody, but at least you're demonstrating that this is where it came from. It came from a bunch of different sources, now I've got the recycled material from one of these. But you can also use it, this is the same, more or less the same chemistry as that previous one. So these are basically the same chemistry, but here I've colored it more effectively. I've just then woven it into a fabric, and then it looks a little more sort of finished. So with recycled materials, you can have a very recycled look. You can also have something which looks very luxury and has an awful lot of performance. Wood, okay, so yeah, the drugs are really. Can everyone keep everyone follow me? You're following me? Okay. So a lot of the construction we see, like let's say the walls here, the tables, etc., it's using wood. Now, the majority of our wood applications nowadays, certainly with interior design, tends to be engineered wood. So plywood, MDF, OSB, those sorts of things. So we are actually able now to produce those entirely out of wood sources. So don't forget, plywood, MDF, OSB, that sort of thing, it has plenty of plastic in it, because the glue holding it all together is a plastic. So, there's a lot of areas where you've got plastic and then you perhaps don't even realize. At least now we're starting to see solutions where we've actually got bio-based versions. So this is now just 100% wood rather than 90% wood and 10% plastic. So we're seeing improvements there, back into sort of entirely bio-based engineered wood solutions. With metals, glass, and ceramics, you're going to have to use a lot of them. Think about this building. This building is, there's a whole bunch of metals in there. The problem we always had was that it takes a huge amount of energy in order to produce metals, glass, and ceramics. But we have started to see now huge increases in the amount of recycled content we can have through metals. And even to the point where actually we're now producing carbon neutral steel. So understand that the materials that you will be using throughout your design life are not going to change that much, certainly on the surface. When you think about it, I'm standing on plenty of wall carpet, which is the same sort of wall that I would have been standing on 150 years ago. Your seat's made out of metal, that's 50 years ago, or even 100 years ago. So the majority of materials that you find within interiors have not changed that much at all. What has changed, and what I think is really exciting, is that we're starting to have better sources for these materials. So carbon neutral steel, we got the same thing with aluminum, and we're even starting to see carbon neutral glasses as well. So the glazing that you produce, 100% recycled and also carbon neutral as well. So same materials, you can design your heart's content, but now at least we have sources that mean that I'm no longer using carbon to produce them, and also I'm using significant, almost 100% recycled content. So as long as you design with the hope that the materials that you use could potentially then be collected again and then reused, think about glazing. When you take down a building, basically that glass can then be reused and be put back into another building, hopefully in a carbon neutral process. I love waste. Waste is one of my favorite topics just because I think it's such value. We've seen how to produce bricks out of construction waste, more bricks out of construction waste, textile panels made out of apparel and other textile materials, objects made out of recycled ceramics as well. So we're getting a lot better at using waste materials. I always give the anecdote that, okay, so your hair, okay? Your hair is your crown jewel. You love your hair, you run your hand through it. It's something that's beautiful, and you take an awful lot of care of it. We think about waste. If you go to the salon, as soon as you cut that hair and it lands on the ground, it's disgusting. I'm not touching that. Like, it suddenly becomes this disgusting. The hair itself has not changed. It's still the same stuff, but because it hit the floor of the salon, now I'm not going anywhere near that. That's disgusting. So understand it. So waste is really just a concept, an idea. Like, same thing with a takeout. So you're out in the park, you had takeout, You had a lovely lunch. You got a little bit left, but so basically, when you take that takeout container, as soon as it goes below the layer of the barrier of the trash can, it's then disgusting. As soon as it goes down there, it's disgusting. It went perfectly fine, wonderfully edible, enjoyed it. Now it's disgusting. So understand that there are differences of perception when you think about waste materials. It doesn't need to be. We have seen a quiet revolution in leather alternatives. We've seen them, first of all, we saw them as vegan leathers, Stanley was doing polyurethane and doing vegan leather. So but those basically just plastic. So now we start to move towards mushroom, apple peel, olive pit, all sorts of different sort of natural materials which are now being produced as leather alternatives. I like leather. I think it has a place, but it has a place when you're going to be producing something which lasts a long time. These shoes, I think, will last me the rest of my life. So I think it's a good use of leather. If I'm using leather just that's going to have, a lifetime, perhaps a few weeks, etc., that's a bad application. So leather has its place, but also if we're increasing the amount of these types of materials we want to use, then it's good to have alternatives. And it's good that we're starting to see things such as mushroom and these other sort of natural materials being used to produce these membranes. Cactus. If you think about fabrics, okay, upholstery fabrics, curtains, that sort of thing, you've got a range of different materials you could use. You can use silk, great. Wool, great. But if I want a performance material, if I want it to be very resistant, this stuff, a lot of people sitting on this will probably get quite dirty quite easily. So therefore, I need to use a synthetic. Synthetics are a lot more durable, so I tend to use those. Problem with synthetics, of course, polyester, nylon, they are not particularly nice. There's no real circularity with them, and they're basically from a petroleum source. We start to see, however, things such as viscose, which come from a natural source, have the same durability and performance as a synthetic, but are actually coming from a bio-based source, and they can also be put back into the system as well. So viscose materials offer a real circularity because they come from a bio-based source, cotton or wood, or even waste materials. I can then use them, and then at the end of their life, I can put them back into the system and manufacture them into more viscose. So understand that, again, material doesn't look any different when you're designing, but understand that they can fundamentally change the way that we source and then resource and reuse at the end of its life. So the materials won't change, but the way we're using them and the way that we're treating them at the end of their life is. These are some of the sources that you can produce from viscose. So you've got some denim jeans, some paper, some agricultural waste, all cellulose-based, so all available to be used into viscose. We're getting better at recycling garments. Polyester is not too hard to do, but anything with wool or cotton, problem is it's very hard to recycle. So you've now found a process of actually recycling a lot of textiles. So think about it. How many textiles there are in the world, and the amount of pollution and the amount of waste that we're getting through the fashion industry. It's terrible. It's awful. But certainly we are at least starting to see some solutions which allow us to then reuse those materials. I put concrete in there just because you will use it at some point. It's also one of those materials that's just absolutely terrible. So for every ton of concrete, you've got a ton of carbon dioxide being produced. But there are now alternatives with very low carbon concrete. Again, same sort of thing as the steel and the glass and the aluminum. Same material, much better, much better in terms of carbon footprint. Problem with concrete, of course, is that you can't use it again. We haven't found a viable second life for concrete. That's one. So we just, in the 100 billion tons of material we produce every year, concrete is a very large part of that. And once you produce it, it's not going anywhere for the next 500 years. So it's one of the concerns we have about those types of materials, which do not recycle easily. I thought I'd include just in terms of future, a lot of industries are starting to automate. Are we starting to see ways in which we can use automation to produce interiors and structures, etc.? This is all 3D printed, large format on the outside of a building. Same thing here. This is actually just a terrazza. So, one of those how a terrazza is made. You basically create these sort of areas here where you pour in your terrazza. So, 3D printer allows you to have much more structural and interesting designs rather than just a simple square that most of them you see in interiors in New York. I saw my 3D printing. So again, there are methodologies to create larger format pieces which are not manufactured in the standard way. So we are starting to see that creep into interiors. It's not a large part of it yet, in the same way it's not a large part of it in apparel either. Just because there are unique challenges you have with interiors where this sort of large format 3D printing can be a challenge to use. I just want to finish up with modularity. Like we've been working with a lot of retail architecture firms and also brands trying to find some level of modularity. So Chanel's retail flagship store, let's say in Paris, 5 to 7 year lifespan. The materials they're using, ceramics, marble, even the carpeting has a much greater lifespan than that. So what do? 7 years, it might, the wall panels, which are, let's say, they're made out of marble or ceramic, those could be fine for another 100 years. But because you have to redo the store, because you need to sort of upgrade and make it look slightly differently, you then have to take those down and find something to do with them. So we're constantly trying to find ways in which we can create modularity within these types of locations. If you know that you're going to change your interior within the next 5 years, you should really be trying to find solutions which you can use again in some other way. And there's been, some attempts. It's all kind of terrible, and so it's something. So this is one of the challenges you will have with, in terms of circularity and also sustainability with interiors, is that for the lifetime of the materials you're using, ceramic, wood, steel, glass, those types of things, they have 100-year lifespan. You're designing them for 5 to 7 years. So that's one of the challenges that you will have. Okay. About 10 years ago, I had an epiphany, and I realized that we're all screwed, because the rate at which we are producing stuff and not doing anything at the end of its life is just, it's not sustainable in any way. So the challenge we're having now at the moment is we are producing more and more stuff, whether it's plastics, whether it's concrete, whatever, and there's no end to it. So eventually we are going to run out of it. We're going to run out of sand for glass. We're going to run out of a whole bunch of rare earth minerals for our batteries, etc. So we are coming, but at no point are we slowing down or stopping or reassessing. So I started thinking this, like, it's awful, I hate it all, it's terrible, and I got kind of depressed. But then I remember that humans they have incredible ingenuity. So we are going to go headlong into a catastrophe, and then when that catastrophe hits, and enough people die, basically we're going to pick ourselves up and we're going to find an alternative solution, because we're very good at that. So I know that's probably a little more than one from an interior design symposium, but my job is to find where materials go, their flows, what you can use, what the alternative, etc. And in the same way that for circularity and sustainability, H&M shouldn't exist, nor should Nike. But they do. So understand that even though I believe we are heading towards, we've talked about climate change. Yes, we're not really doing enough about it. We're seeing real time a lot of the challenges, and people are dying. But not until, but at some point I think we will have some sort of catastrophe that's big enough, and we'll actually make that change. On the way to there, I think in order to to mitigate and reduce the amount of impact that you have with the work that you do, I think the idea is like, take some of the innovations, list some of the ways in which you can create more sustainable and circular solutions, and adopt those. Because it's not going to happen unless we all make some attempt to move that forward. It may slow us down before that catastrophe, but certainly, but I think the idea is that at least we're putting in place the ways in which we should be doing things. Because AI, okay? AI is one of the new things to solve all the problems, okay? When AI basically says to us, okay, in order to make sure that the planet doesn't heat up too much, you need to do these 3 or 4 things. We already knew what those are. We don't need much more circular. We need to repurpose things. We need to reduce the amount of impact we have. We need to stop buying stuff. So when AI tells us to do those things, are we going to do it, or are we going to say, no, I don't want to listen anymore? So we already know how to solve these problems. We have worked it out. We just got to implement it. And my concern, of course, is that I wish we did it now. I think it's not going to happen for a number of years before something kind of happens. I didn't really want to tend to finish on that. No, sorry. I think it's the painkillers causing this, but thank you for your attention. So.
I felt like Andrew already answered some of my questions that I prepared for him, but still, I think it's more like a discussion. First question. Now, I also teach materials for interior designers, So you actually showed already some of the stuff that you think they should know, right, today. But particularly there, a lot of them are maybe focused on fashion or product, industrial design, but particularly maybe for interior designer, what are the few materials you think they should know, like now, like, and they still don't know maybe?
We were talking earlier, and I know that you don't have such a huge amount of materials education. So unfortunately, it will be you have to do it yourself. You'll have to basically find out yourself. For me, the things you need to know is you need every single thing you put into an interior. Shame on you if you don't know what it is, and you don't know its impact, and you don't know how potentially you could have made it better if you'd been given enough time or money, etc. So gone is the time when you can just put in stuff because it looks nice. You have a responsibility to understand the stuff you're putting in there. And it takes a little bit extra time, fair enough, but that'll only just help you learn more about your practice. But I think you need to, I look and see things, I see what's underneath, what it's made of. I think you now have to do that as well, because there are, you can't have a choice and just say, well, I didn't know, or I wasn't thinking about that. You have a responsibility. We're seeing this in a lot of our brands where they're requiring EPDs or some sort of LCD for everything that they're putting in there. You have to know about it, because also just to make sure that you can sleep well at night, if you're going to put in a material, you better know what it is. And also, because if it is something that's not particularly nice, then that's your responsibility. But I think, for me, it's sort of, and every time that you come across a new thing, learn about it. There's plenty of information out there. You can go use AI if you want, but there's all sorts of data information out there. You can absorb that knowledge really quickly. And I think what it allows you to do is it'll help you design better with it. Because once you understand its properties, once you understand what it's made of, how it's made, how I could make it better or different or look different. So understanding the material will help you be a lot more creative in the spaces that you use up.
Okay, because I'm speaking with a material scientist, incident designer, because all our other analysts were all coming from a design background. So I see distinctly the change of PowerPoint style. So how do you think designer can learn about materials? Because we're not trained as scientists, right? And also we just learn about how designers actually make materials, DIY material from the previous presenter. In your opinion, because you're like, oh, they are just playing, they're not serious, maybe, in your opinion, but how do you think they can potentially be seriously part of the industry in terms of material design, material making, even just material selection? I mean, you work for a big library that has over, I know, like 20,000 material bank has like 20,000, 30,000 SKU of materials. Just how to start is the question. How can they be seriously be part of the material process?
Curiosity. Okay, so the clothes that you're wearing, okay? You're very particular about what you choose, right? And I'm sure a lot of you will have a very particular stuff. I don't want to use that because I don't like that material. I don't like that brand. I don't like the way that brand approaches its material story. So you're very opinionated about clothes that you wear, and you're probably aware of what those things are made out of. I would say the same thing with anything else. If there aren't that many materials in the world, like in carpeting, there's probably like 5 different things you can choose. Like in metals, you've probably got 4 different metals. That's it. So it's not, we're not talking, it's not talking about the whole thing of material science, where tens of thousands. You've got a relatively basic palette of materials you can use. Engineered wood, sheetrock, you've got paint, you've got steel, you've got upholstery, you've got foam, the polyurethane foam inside here. It's not a massive toolbox. It's something you can master relatively easily. And then the idea then is once you've got that understanding of the stuff you're putting out there, then it's this nuance. Then do you care where the wool came from? Do you care how the wool is dyed? So I think get the basics, and then you can work on the more specific things about sort of very particular aspects of each of those material classes.
I mean, for example, just a quick practical question. If I open up the website of Material Bank or Material Connection, there's already a huge library there. How do they start?
About the student stuff?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, everything's on composition, and like, I know that it's based upon the application, but all the material composition is there. It's all there and available. That's probably one of the simplest ways, because it's all immediately available on that. And you can search for basically, you can search for nylon-based things, you can search for recycled content. There are ways of searching based on material composition that will allow you then to understand what's important in that particular material class.
Okay, I'll try that in my class next time. All right, I know this is the buzzword nowadays, the AI and technologies. I know material development and material science is actually kind of the opposite of that. Because in the physical world, we make testing, we make a prototype, which takes much longer time. While in AI, one mouse click and you generate mid-journey image, you already get 100. So how is that impacting our, I would say, material research, material design, and material selection process? How AI is impacting?
Well, actually, AI is, there are some things which AI is very, very good at. And so it's working in medicine, it's also working in science. The materials that we have around us are a combination of different elements, right? So, you know, the plastics are mostly carbon, there's some hydrogens, oxygen, etc. This steel is probably iron, carbons, manganese, and silicon, whatever. So they got to those compositions by working painstakingly, so going through, okay, I'm going to put some carbon in, and 5% carbon, 3% manganese, and 2% silicon. Okay, that's one. So you put that all together, test that sample. And then you go to the next one, you add like 1% extra manganese, whatever. It's a painstaking process, takes months, years, etc. AI can now very quickly work out through the existing research that we've done already, are there areas of materials that show a huge amount of promise? Are there some cadmium, platinum, lead materials that have wonderful superconducting properties? So material science is being revolutionized and speeded up because AI is actually able to find the combinations of materials that create unique possibilities, whether it's superconducting, whether it's super lightweight, super strong, whatever. So we're going to start seeing a whole host of new materials coming out there in material science. I don't, you know, I think AI also has, I think AI is good as a baseline. At the moment, it's good for doing baseline stuff, but unfortunately, you need to put your name on it, and also you need to check, because at the moment, I don't think it's good enough to really have it such that you can just, I wouldn't trust AI to just design something for me. But it was interesting, I was at a conference in Miami, no, Fort Lauderdale, was it? And there was like 100 architects, and we were talking about AI, and they were saying that within the next 5 years, most of their jobs will be gone. Because AI can, basically, if you're building this building, there are codes, there are requirements, etc. AI can now do all of that. If you know, you give it a space, 3,000 square feet, it'll design whatever you want, it'll choose the materials, it'll make sure it's up to code, it'll even find the best way to create space. So, what it doesn't have though, is it doesn't have the creative value. It's, you know, and I think what we'll find is that AI deals with a whole bunch of mid-level stuff. But if you're very creative and very interested in the way that you work, then it still is not able to do that bit. It can do the grunt work, it can create the space with all the materials, but it would only create a basic space. It wouldn't have any heart, it wouldn't have any real sort of style or look. So I think there's still opportunity and value in having that creative output. But a lot of the basic stuff within the interiors, it's basically, it's going to be, they will have general contracts to do the whole thing.
Thank you, and thank you for being optimistic. I'll leave the floor to our students to have more questions for Andrew.
I'm curious on your background, what made you interested in being a designer, design and material scientist, and why you didn't choose designing instead?
Okay, so my parents said I needed to be an engineer. Design wasn't even considered. Like in the mid-80s in Wales, design, not design. You know, in the UK, it wasn't a thing at all. So you doctor, lawyer, I'm squeamish, I couldn't be a doctor. So I ended up doing engineering. I like materials because it was one of the easier ones to get into. Like civil engineering, mechanical engineering is a lot harder. materials engineering a lot easier. So I went in there. But what I found out though, I was going to become an academic, and I found that it was just draining and boring because of the people. And the reason why I'm not saying that scientists are boring, I'm just saying that I get so much joy and enjoyment out of interacting with creatives. I draw from their energy and I love that interaction. So I found that I can take my material science knowledge and then work with people who I really enjoy being around. Like I don't like scientists, they tend to draw energy away from me, therefore I get no energy. Whereas creatives, I can draw from them and basically we can bounce ideas off each other. So that was a great thing for me. That's why I'm in the same job for 25 years. I continually have great fun and meet incredible people who are creators. And that to me is like, has kept my joy of the work I do alive.
We don't reciprocate though. I was just saying he doesn't reciprocate with all this negative things.
I'm not being negative, I'm being pragmatic.
So based on the last presentation and coming up with these ideas of like using matching materials for like everything, I feel like you kind of went back on like, okay, we need to be reusing the material that we already have in the built environment, which I agree with. Do you think that that's smarter than like trying to create these new matching materials?
I think we need both. I think there's a lot of opportunity to create new materials that are from bio-based sources. The challenge will always be, will it be up to code? Can we get enough volume? Is it right to the price? Is it where I need it? So that's the challenge with any new material, is that where can I find it, and is it going to satisfy the application I've got for it? So, but I do think bio-based material, we've seen a huge revolution in that. I think the challenge, of course, is also that it took plastics 70 years to get to this point. We're expecting our natural materials to immediately become viable and usable and almost different performance aspects. So it will take a little bit longer because we're now very impatient.
70 years for plastic to be mass produced, and biomaterial will take another 140 years?
I mean, we're asking our biomaterials to compete against plastics. Plastics are this good because they're optimized in our system.
Do you think AI can help to accelerate that 140 years?
Yes, I think, it will help us in ways that we're not even aware.
I just don't want our students to think they won't be alive to see that.
So it will speed it up. And, it's also, it's your choice. Like, you decide what sort of materials you're going to put in front of the client. Obviously they'll have an idea, but then you can choose that. If you want to get experimental, you want, So I think, I didn't mean to be very dismissive with using AI. I mean, every industry right now is really saying like, where are we going to have any jobs in stuff? Think about all the coding of jobs. 10, 15 years ago, go code. It's a guaranteed job, make a lot of money. Now, I've got coding people, they just get out of it. So, but then those coders will go do something else.
Yeah.
But I think the advantage you have, of course, is that this is still a creative field, and people still need to. No one wants an interior designed by AI.
I want to add
Yes, of
to
course.
this, just as a practicing professional.
Mhm.
Almost every material now has a list of ingredients and where they kind of stand in the sustainable world. And when you put those materials in front of your client and you're excited by it, they're excited by it. And that's how it works. So.
Yeah, that is.
And when you talk about the health implications of them, right? Like no one wants to touch plastic. That's super toxic on your body, even if it's reused, right? And so I think that's when you see it, there's transparency around it. And you talk about it in terms of the health of your body. Yeah. Sorry. Just commenting on material health, which in creating healthier environments and what it creates. So I think there's also a reframing that we need to have around the interior. I think from a design perspective, I think if we're talking about permanent spaces, right, like Gia, you talked about an impermanence of space, and that takes a reframing around our spaces and how long we think they're going to be around. But as you said, right, if there's demolitions happening every 3 to 7 years, we can't be using those same materials,
Right, yes.
right? And we have to be able to go into a space and be like, well, what can I use,
right? How is the site of quarry as opposed to bringing and extracting it and being part of the extractive system? So.
And do the materials need to be as high performing, can we use more experimental materials, more bio-based materials that maybe don't have the same performance, but only need them for 3 years?
Yeah.
So that there's an opportunity there.
I would argue, I think that we need different systems, right? So if we're going towards biomaterial future, which I think we are, we need to have compost in every one of our backyards. We need different systems that are happening too. So I think our systems will transform around us too.
Yeah, we're still using the systems based upon synthetic materials. Yes, we haven't yet. So
I just want to add something for the students. This is the professor in me. In our department in industrial design and Pratt, we deal with production, mass production, it's a huge topic because, we can be designing a room, but when you're designing something that's gonna be turning out of a factory, the footprint is incredible, right? And so it can be very daunting, and it can be also, like you can start questioning, like, why am I doing this, And I remember when I was a student, now colleague of mine, he had this beautiful class called Sustainable Production Method, where we got really deep into, the whole process from extraction, where it comes from, if it's such and such material, then it goes here, then it goes here. It was like really beautiful and scary, right? And you had to choose something that you like. So if I like the scarf, I need to figure out where all of this came from and where it went, where you got the dyes, what country, then it went here, then it went there. At the end of this exercise, he asked, where do you think you can reduce something and not impact the design of it? And I remember I had a backpack and I was like, you know what, like this backpack doesn't need this zipper. Like you can have a pocket without a zipper. And so that allowed me to think that in the end, we all have a capacity to choose to do even the smallest of things. And if we're all doing that, then everything's gonna slowly get better. Like we cannot approach problems like this and think that we're gonna resolve them. We just have to try to do our best to kind of like be conscious about the materials we choose. Maybe we have to sacrifice certain things, but we have the capacity of like pushing some things that are better, And this relieves me from feeling like crap, basically.
We're having an impromptu speakers discussion, which is fantastic. Maybe we can move to our last speaker. Natural continuation of the conversation that we had so far. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Well, thanks for having me here today. And I feel like that last conversation was a perfect cue for me.
Yes.
Because one, I want to talk about how we try to implement some of these things in a bigger practice. And then two, I'm a optimistic person. And so I believe that because, when I started doing sustainability about 20 years ago with large firms, I was the only person, in a 600-person firm doing sustainability analytics. And slowly that grew and slowly, it increased and increased. And I think we're in a very different place now. It's still, we're running against time. We've kind of passed that critical moment where we should have, 10 years ago, I thought, oh, we're gonna be fine. We're not quite fine, but I think we're gonna figure things out before it's too late. I'll start with just quickly something about me, my background. Like I said, I've been doing sustainability since I joined SOM 2007 or so. We worked on various projects with them on embed sustainability. I ran my own practice for about 5 years, and then worked with HOK. One of my most proudest interiors project is the one for 4 Times Square, which is now labeled 140, 150 something 42nd Street. We did that modular design for the ceiling. We were talking about this modular ideas. I've worked on projects in India, some pro bono work where I design schools, and now in my current position at Corbin, I lead sustainability for the firm. That role has been kind of coming for a lot of years, and I think the impact that we can make in a firm that is designing millions and millions of square feet a year can be impactful. So I'll give you a quick background on what Corbin is. We are about 1,100 plus people, grew out of Dallas about 85 years ago. architecture firm in building design construction, ASID firm here, and number 6 interior design Jan. We are in all kinds of market sectors, everything from aviation to education, healthcare, workforce, residential mixed use, you name it, we do that. But more importantly, I think we start to go beyond just the traditional design practice and offer things like climate and sustainability, which is the team that I've built up, change management or media and communication. Some of these things are sort of the offshoots from design. And Corbin Echo is the branded name of our sustainability group that started about 2 years ago when I joined the firm. We have about 6 people now. And what we try to do is really 3 key areas of impact. One is design integration, which is our main focus. So we do a lot of kind of analytics work within the firm, sustainability consulting that, is associated with built environments, but not necessarily a particular project. And then advisory, which can be more corporate type of sustainability consulting. I wanted to start with something, and I know we were talking about this material health and environmental impact of materials. And, we've often talked about how some of these things are so connected and you don't realize that this bio-based materials you were talking about, Michelle, it's as good as it is for the environment, it is good for us. And those linkages are so evident sometimes and often overlooked. And we really need to start thinking of things in a holistic way. So this kind of diagram literally came up a week ago when we were talking about Corbin Zone sort of events around Earth Day or Earth Month, right? And I invited people who were talking about healthy environments. And so somebody asked me, what do you mean? What's the connection between the environment and health? And there's a clear link, and I don't think a lot of people often understand that. Natural light, when you allow natural light into a space and really make it work, it means I reduce my lighting loads. It also means that I feel better and I perform better. So all of these things are linked if you look a little deeper. And then, similar idea and sort of connection is the choices that we make. Everything, every material you select, every design choice you make has an impact. And I always say the one thing that anytime I presented to students is, don't ever underestimate the impact of what you do, right? And when I started my career, I was drawing bathrooms. Even if you're designing bathrooms, there's an impact. Think about the material choices, think about the layouts, think about every little thing, and it puts you on the right path. So never forget that everything counts. So I'm going to jump into sustainability. It's a big word, it's kind of cliche. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. And so we try to kind of organize it in a way that makes sense. Especially in a large organization, you want to have a clear understanding and priorities in every project and in every team. So we've kind of split it up into 4 buckets or leaves, health and well-being and energy and carbon being sort of more prominent and critical items we are constantly dealing with. I'm going to go through those sections, and then there's obviously natural resources and biodiversity, everything from circular economy, water conservation, those kind of things. And then climate change and resiliency. And that's what I mean by we're kind of behind the ball now, because we are talking about resiliency, we are talking about adaptation, we are trying to design buildings and spaces that can adapt to the changing climate around us. Oh, one other thing, my sort of the circle, concentric circles in the middle, that whole notion of everything at the individual level is connected to the planet. And if you really think about it, there is a direct link. So never underestimate what we're doing, even in the smallest, project. So I'm gonna start with health and well-being. There's different aspects to it. We talked about a bunch of things today. But visual comfort, thermal comfort, those are real aspects of design that we look at more carefully. I always remember the statement from Louis Kahn, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said something along the lines of, you start with the immeasurable, you go through the measurable, and then you come out immeasurable. And so in my brain, I associated it directly with sustainability practices and said, yes, you start poetic, but you have to understand when you talk about the drama of light and space, You have to go through the measurable. I can tell you exactly how much lux is coming in through a window and where we feel comfortable. At the end of the project, we don't talk about that lux level, right? We talk about the beauty of that space. So that process you have to go through to get to that poetic end, right? So I'm going to give you the sort of measurable stuff behind the scenes, and then you can apply that to your design process. And I'll give you some examples of what we do. This is a project in Texas that we're working on. KERA is sort of like a local radio station, kind of like NPR here, and we're designing their headquarters. And we really work very closely with the design team in kind of understanding not just the program inside, but the envelope and how it was functioning, and laying out, you know, where were you getting more light? Is it working for the program that's inside or not? How do you start, you know, measuring, and how do you start assessing the different ideas around the fenestration? What do you put for shading devices? And, you know, we can run number of iterations and begin to give them actual value. So you can kind of intuitively look at some of these design ideas and say, oh, this one will work better than the other. But when I put numbers to it, you know exactly what's going on, right? And you can define what your goals should be and work with that. And, you know, we're not quite at the AI level yet, but we are using computational processes where I can plug in a lot of these things kind of in an automated process. I'm sure you guys probably using that, but we can plug in a lot of these things in a computational way where I can ask the Rhino Grasshopper platform to iterate the shading depth by half a meter for, you know, whatever innumerable number of times, and then run the analysis for daylighting and tell me what's the best one. And those things, you know, have been around for like almost a decade now. So anyway, so the point is that we're not doing these things for lead credits, we're not doing these things for any other purpose, but to make sure that the design output is the best possible product that we can create. Right? So it's again, the idea is that, you know, environmental parametrics or environmental analytics are part of the design process, and they help you create better spaces. And, you know, same thing, we're working with another project, confidential project here in New York. And we're doing the interior space for an existing tower. And we actually go to that space, and we've been measuring, we walk around with luxometers, and we can measure exact light that's coming through that space. And then, you know, kind of almost creating a digital twin and understanding what that, you know, validating that and addressing that. And that process right now is not only for your window treatment design, but we're actually looking at how you lay out the floor plans, making sure that people sitting on the perimeters are not going to get blinded on a, you know, winter afternoon or something. So this is just, you know, some of it is intuitive, but we're able to give so much more specific information on that the designers can be more informed when they're trying to design these spaces. This is a rendering of our 54th floor office space in Empire State Building. We're currently in our 10th space, so this is under, I think we're in demolition mode right now. Anyway, so the other idea I want to kind of bring up is this notion of biophilic design, right? Which is part of what, you know, helps us feel better and part of the comfort and well-being aspect of it. And the only reason I wanted to put that up is often we think about biophilic design as, you know, plants and greenery and all that. It's not just that. It's a lot of different things, and I would encourage you guys to kind of look at that more carefully. It's everything from, you know, variability, which is the most important thing I feel. It's not always necessary. Humans are designed to be in nature. When it's cold outside, you want to feel a little cold. It's okay. We're designed to take that. We don't have to be at 72 degrees all the time, right? And same thing about visual kind of variability. In the morning, are you it's too warm in here. And also, as human beings, we're not all the same, right? So there's that level. I mean, there's a lot that goes into thinking and understanding these things. And it's never, we tend to standardize everything. Like when we design buildings, we say 24 degrees Celsius or 72 degrees Celsius plus minus one. No, that's not the ideal. I mean, we're fine at 78, we're fine at 68. And it varies and depends on a lot of different factors. So anyways, so think about those kind of things there where, you know, a number of things that, or even materiality. This is an example of a project we did in Dallas. Just the feel of a natural material, wood above your head in an airport makes you feel different than it would if you were in a completely steel building, right? Like it's those kind of things that are really impactful. I wanted to show you that these renderings, and we're kind of lucky because in the Empire State Building, we kind of get all four sides. So, you know, there's this notion of also self-agency, you know, how do you behave in a space that you're in? And because we have all four sides and you can get all kind of variability in daylight, you can literally walk around that space and, you know, go to the kitchen, which is facing south if you want to have direct sunlight. And allowing those kind of spaces for people to be in, to be able to get up and say, I want to kind of say a slightly different environment. Those are things that make us feel better. So the big elephant in the room, energy and carbon, right? That's where, I mean, if it weren't for this climate change issue, we wouldn't even be talking about this. And I've had many people come up to me and say, well, if we figured out nuclear fission, then you're out of job. I'm like, no, the first part, the health and well-being always remains. We're still trying to create better buildings, but this is a pressing issue, and so we're doing a lot here. So I'm gonna give you a bit of a background on how and what is important, what's really going on in the corporate world, perhaps. We have been dealing with the operational energy and carbon for a while. We kind of know how to deal with that. We know how to design buildings that can be net zero. Embodied carbon and all these materiality issues that we were talking about is somewhat new and somewhat out of our control. Like these are not things, we specify them, we select them, but we don't make them. But the industry has been really pushing the last couple of years. It's really, I mean, a few years now, it's starting to take shape. And just the point of, you know, I think somebody mentioned the 7-year cycle in commercial interiors or interior spaces. That really puts an emphasis on why it is so much more important for interior design. I'll give you a couple of examples. This is a project, and I'll go from operational carbon to embodied carbon. This is a project we're currently under construction just outside of Dallas, and it's going to be net positive energy. So it's not just net zero by a little margin, but we're going to produce more energy than the building utilizes. It's, you know, it's a number of phases. I'm not going to go into all the details, but we've designed and we're under construction for phase 1, which is almost 900,000 square feet, so almost like close to 1 million square feet. Not a small project by any means. It's not headquarters, but a corporate campus for Wells Fargo. There was a lot of emphasis put into reducing the energy use. Part of that was the building envelope. Part of it was, and more interestingly, and this is one thing that really wows me, the clients were very, very interested in reducing the energy. So what they did was, the way they would have programmed these two buildings with people sitting in kind of various locations depending on their departments and such, they actually looked at everybody's schedule. And if a department had, you know, 18-hour day schedule versus another department that had an 8-hour schedule, they programmed the building so that the 18-hour schedule people were all together, and then the 8-hour people were all together. And what that did was basically allowed the buildings to shut down portions of it when people are not around. Imagine if they were all scattered all over the place, you would have, you know, most of the building running all the time, even though it's sparsely populated. So it's just simple things like that, rethinking programming helps us save energy. I mean, we're not even doing anything to the design. We're not putting in any new technologies or anything like that. So just giving it a lot of thought, and when you have a client like that who's totally interested, I think it changes a lot of things. We did put dynamic glazing on this envelope. Not my favorite thing, but it works. It helps reduce the energy. It does shape the building, and the systems are pretty high efficiency. And then we just basically lathered the roof everywhere with solar panels. Our energy use intensity is down at 38.1. For reference, that's like about what passive house standards ask you to be. So it's super high, in terms of performance. And then we're covering, we're making up for all that energy used by the solar panels. So it's a bit of, I sometimes think it's a bit of cheating because it's not really an urban campus, it's suburban. So we have the flexibility, we have all that surface area to put solar panels, but nonetheless, I don't know of any other almost 1 million square feet campus that's going to be net zero and net positive energy. Just some additional highlights on the sustainability standards. And you can see we're going to end up producing about almost 5% more energy than the building is needing. All of this obviously has to be validated once the building is running. So often we as designers tend to kind of design something and walk away. But the reality is the building has a life. And once it takes on a life, somebody has to monitor, understand how it's being operated and making sure that we are operating the building in the way it was meant to be. And that brings me to embodied carbon. I think we've talked about this quite a bit, so I'm not going to go over this diagram, but the idea is that you understand everything that goes into producing a product or material, how it's put into installation, what happens during its life, and what happens, really importantly, at the end of its life, which often we tend to forget. This gets a little bit technical, but the idea being that there are standards out, around the world that we have adopted, and there's very specific sort of modules and stages of a life cycle of a product. Not everything is always included. In the United States, it's typically cradle to gate. So you go from the material supply to manufacturing. Some companies will go a little bit further into A5. In Europe, you're also required to have the C stage, the end of life stage. So these are just kind of parameters and boundaries that allow you to measure the environmental impact of a product. And then when it comes to us, when we're looking at these things, our process has to align with the design process. And so one of the things, we've started kind of refining this depending on the project. But the first step is data collection, understanding how much quantities are going into a project, what are the specifications, what is the industry baseline. This is still an evolving kind of science, so a lot of times we run into issues about what's the baseline, who defines it, right? And we're still figuring those things out. We've actually recently did a research around mass timber because mass timber has been questioned quite a bit around, whether our assumption of it being carbon neutral is correct or not. And so our team actually did a bit of research and figured out a way to calculate the biogenic carbon, which that's a whole other lecture. But anyway, so the point being that we are still figuring out a lot of these boundaries and how things should be calculated, what are the baselines, and then how do we show how much we've improved. But this would be a typical process. Some of it aligns with some of the standards like LEED, sometimes it doesn't. We get a lot of clients who are driven by sort of their corporate goals, ESG goals, and so they care less about LEED. They just want to know from one project to the next, are we reducing our emissions? Which is a much better way to deal with these things. On the interior side, again, this is sort of a chart. One of the first things you want to do, when we're talking about where do you start, I think one of the first things you want to do is understand your hotspots. Where, is it the ceiling? Is it the wall? Is it the flooring? So we run that calculation based on, again, quantities and, material specs. We're trying to figure out and say, okay, Mr. Designer, you got to focus on the ceiling because that's where all your embodied carbon, there is some metal studs behind your gypboard wall, right? Whatever it is, and then we start from the lowest hanging fruit down or up. We do similar things for, building core and shell projects where obviously concrete becomes the biggest issue. And this is one of those kind of projects where we are highlighting, your hotspots, and it's typically concrete and steel. We kind of know that depending on the building type, but most of the time that's where it ends up being. I'm going to stop there, but I just wanted to kind of share with you, how we are trying to incorporate this in the process. And the process to me is the most important. especially in large practices, we often get asked and told that, look, I've got a project, and especially interior projects, the life of a project, design project is maximum, 4 months. I don't have time to find the materials. Those are the questions some of these were coming up. I don't have time to find materials. I don't have time to figure out, what is good and what is bad. I need to deliver my drawings and get paid, right? So we're constantly trying to figure out ways where we say, okay, you don't have to do all of those things. We're gonna figure out some quick processes where you can do a couple of buttons somewhere and figure out, and that hotspot identification is one of them. So if we did, 10 offices, we did the 11th one, I don't even have to run an analysis. I can tell you where you should be targeting first, which material should you be looking at first, right? So that's the kind of sort of process implementation and knowledge sharing within the firm that will help us kind of create a much bigger impact at the end. I'll stop there. Thanks.
So, since Vermicoli was invited by our students, we would like to give them this few remaining minutes of today's event for some questions to our guests. And then I think I'll invite all our speakers today for a nice guys, any question? Yes?
I just wanted to ask, so you mentioned on the Wells Fargo corporate campus, the client actually wanted to offer a more sustainable design, right? So have you ever come across a client where you try to push sustainability, like a sustainable design onto them, and for some reason they didn't want to, like regarding price, time, anything? What do you do in that situation?
Well, that happens more than often. Usually the clients, again, things have changed, but I'll give you a couple of examples. When I started doing this at SOM back in 07, 08, we had a client like that who could care less. But we were kind of driven, like I was doing these analysis to make sure that the daylighting was working and all of these things. So I continued to do that, even though the client wasn't really like care. He was just looking at the renderings like, oh yeah, it's beautiful. And at the same time, me and a designer, we were working together to make sure that the building massing was stepped in a way or the facade was designed to get all these things done. So we kind of sneaked it in, right? Like it was a design thing. He couldn't change the design because it looked great, but at the same time, it was performing. What was interesting was at the end of like when we were almost done with ED phase, and I kept creating a book with everything that I did. And I showed it to him once, and I remember like around ED phase, and I looked at it and said, oh, can you give me a couple of copies? I gave it to him. And then later on, I found out he came to me and said, this has become my marketing book because I go around telling people my building has better natural light than any other building here, and I sell more. So it's about, a lot of times it's about education. A lot of times if the more you kind of combine that with a design story and a design language, that's what it is. That's why I keep saying it's not, forget sustainability, it's design. It's better design when you know the context. The context is the environment. So you design better with your context, it's a sustainable building and everybody's happy.
Okay, so my first question I had, you answered it. I was gonna ask, like, how can you fit all of that work in like the time limit that we have? But you kind of answered that question. So another one I had is kind of based off of Nisha's question, like, what I'm sure there are people out there who don't care about sustainability and to make those decisions, and they would actually just prefer something cheaper and straight to the point. And especially because we're living in America and everyone is like so giddy and happy with how everything is, how can we really implement change, especially when it comes to like these natural and organic materials I was trying to introduce? Like, I feel like how he said, like it's gonna have to come to a disaster happening before America really wants to face what we have to do.
Yeah, well, let's not go that far. I think we'll figure it out. But as a designer, right, I think I think you have to be creative with the way you think. And I'll tell you over the years, I mean, I used to, when I started doing this, I was very idealistic, and any client who said, I didn't want this, I was all upset, and like, these clients are awful or whatever, you know? And now what I've realized is, the first thing you do is you ask them about their values, what is important to them. And I can guarantee you, you will find a link between a better, you know, environmentally friendly design and their value. And so I'll give you an example. I work in Texas. There are clients there that don't want to use the word sustainability. So I say, you want to reduce your energy bills? Yes, they want to reduce their energy bills. I'm like, okay, I'm not talking sustainability. I'm just talking a better performing building. We're going to make sure with little extra capital cost in your building, we can give you a product that, you know, especially school buildings, right? You're going to operate, you've got a maintenance or operating a budget. I can help you reduce that. Why would you want to do that? So I think it's about understanding the values. It might be about, you know, kids in school, and you say, well, don't you want a better environment inside? Don't you want to make sure that I'm not putting a product in there that's unhealthy for your occupants? So it's just, a lot of times it's about understanding the values and aligning ourselves with them. And then it becomes a whole lot easier. It's like the conversation just, there's no contention, there's no issues, and it starts to align. So one of the things I always tell anytime I present to students, I didn't have this today, I always say be fluid. Don't get so idealistic and in your own thoughts that you don't understand the other person. If the other person has values, there's always a way to kind of bring it all together and make it happen.
Okay, so it's kind of a hypothetical question going off of what Jose said, like, if there was ever a client where they didn't want to comply with whatever sustainability things that you suggested, would you ever deny that client? Because I know Corgan is a big company, so it's like kind of like make a certain amount of money. So is it like, I'm gonna deny the client because we have enough, or is it we're gonna take this time because that's more money for us?
You're asking questions that my CEO should answer, not me. But
Good answer.
yeah. Look, I don't know if that's the case. I think we more than often obviously want to take clients on this, and the reasons a firm would reject clients would be for, I would think, more financial reasons than idealistic reasons. But I have worked with firms like Bureau Happel. It was a firm that I was with, and they denied, it wasn't, sorry, I take that back, it wasn't Bureau Happel, but it was a firm that denied work in certain parts of the world because of their stance on human rights and things like that. So that does happen. I think more so than not in large corporations. But at the same time, you know, you have to look at it as an opportunity. If I can get more sustainability in a school building in Texas, that's a bigger win for me than doing, you know, a highly sustainable project in New York City. Like, yeah, think about it that way.
Any other questions from the public? Oh, we have a question over there.
As students, what do you think are things that we should be implementing in our projects so we could go into the workforce with a more sustainable background? Because talking before that we don't have a lot of reality and all of those type of systems in place right now to kind of give us that outlook. So what are things that we should be doing ourselves to kind of be more informed?
I think it starts with, you know, as Andrew said, curiosity. I mean, just, you know, if you are really interested in this, you know, don't wait for anybody, just start. There's so much information on the internet and Google it, find out. And more importantly, when you do land up in your jobs, don't stop asking. That is one thing I've seen at Corgan, which is like so encouraging to me and optimistic, is that the younger generation is more interested in, you know, in sustainability than the older folks, and it's they're driving a lot of it. You just arrived at Corgan, but you know, our Dallas office did not have, and again, it's just a cultural thing in Texas, right? We didn't have recycling or composting for the longest time. And it's a 500-person office. So it's a huge impact. It was a group of young employees at the Dallas office who used a project to figure out how to compost, found the company, weighted, like they actually measured and weighed the waste that was diverted from landfill, convinced the corporate leadership that this is what we want, and now we have it. So, you know, the change is coming. The change is all in your hands. You have to stand up and ask and get involved. It's awesome. And it's the smallest things, like this small project that they started is now, you know, a recycling composting program in an office of 500 plus people. Huge impact.
Help me thank again our incredible speakers and also help our incredible moderators. Thank you so much.